sleep. Across the world, colossal stones stand in defiance of time. Monoliths rise, statues watch, their silent eyes filled with memories we can't quite recall. Beneath jungles, beneath forgotten hills, lie traces of something ancient, something humanity was never meant to forget. Who carved these giants? Who moved mountains without machines? Some of these sites are older than history itself, built not merely to exist but to endure. Tonight we follow the trail of the megaliths, from lost temples to impossible sculptures, to a figure carved not from the mountain, but as the mountain itself. High above the confluence of 3 roaring rivers in Sichuan, China, a calm presence sits in eternal silence, watching centuries drift by unmoved. The Leshan giant Buddha, not built, not placed, but born from the living rock. 71 meters tall, arms resting upon his knees, his face carved with such serenity that it seems to breathe with the land itself. Still watching, still silent, still waiting for us to understand why he was made. And yet, no one really knows why he was made the way he was, or how. Construction began in the early 700s during the Tang dynasty. We're told a monk named Haitong started it. He believed the turbulent waters below, where the Min River, Dadu River, and Qingyi River met, were claiming too many lives. He hoped that carving a Buddha would calm the waters. It sounds symbolic, poetic, but somehow it worked. After the carving began, sediment from the carving process filled the water near the base. It disrupted the currents, and over time the dangerous whirlpools seemed to stop. But here's what people still puzzle over. This wasn't just a statue to look at. It was engineered. There's a hidden drainage system carved inside the statue. Channels beneath the hair curls, through the chest, under the arms, and behind the ears, all redirecting rainwater, preventing erosion. It's been keeping the statue from wearing down for over 1,000 years. Who designed that? A monk from the Tang dynasty or something far older than that era? Because the precision isn't something you find in most ancient carvings. His ears, for example, are 7 meters long, but carved out of wood, coated in clay. They've lasted through storms, earthquakes, wars, and time itself. And the head, 15 meters tall, aligns so perfectly with the cliff that even in heavy rains the water it was advanced. Now imagine you're standing at the base looking up. You can't see his full body unless you're far away. From nearby it's just cliffs and rocks until you realize you're staring at a foot the size of a room. Each toenail is taller than most people. But what's stranger than the size is the feeling. Everyone says the same thing. That standing near him, you don't feel watched but witnessed. Like he's known you for a long time. And when the mist rolls in from the riverbanks, when the tourists go quiet, it feels like he's the only thing that's alive in the whole valley. Some say the Buddha predates the Tang dynasty, that the carving could be older, repurposed during Haitong's time, because early records are vague. And despite the scale of the project, few documents exist about how long it really took, how many worked on it, or what techniques they used. It's not carved like other Tang-era statues. This one had planning, drainage, engineering, and yet the tools you'd need to achieve that, surveying instruments, scaling scaffolds, terrain mapping, don't show up in records until much later. And then there's the positioning. The Leshan giant Buddha faces Mount Amei, one of the 4 sacred Buddhist mountains of China, directly, almost like a guardian placed there on purpose. His gaze is not passive. It aligns, perfectly positioned to look out at something that once mattered, possibly something that's now gone. Some have speculated that the entire site is a form of ancient landscape symbolism, that the rivers, the mountain, the Buddha form a kind of earth-aligned network like feng shui on a massive forgotten scale. And what if Haitong didn't come up with the idea? What if he was just preserving something already sacred, or something already built? There are signs of earlier carvings beneath the current figure. Traces of rock that was reshaped, foundations that don't match the upper layers. And beneath the feet, sealed caves, still unexplored. In the 1990s, when preservationists began repairs, they found hollow chambers behind parts of the statue. They also found iron rods driven deep into the cliff. Support structures, but of an origin. No record of them in any scroll. No name to credit. Even the cliff itself, after 1,300 years of wind and rain, has barely eroded where the Buddha sits. Geologists still don't fully understand why the sandstone holds up so well in that particular zone. It's not like the rest of the mountain. And then, there are the eyes. Dark, empty, but carved in such a way that no matter where you stand, it feels like the Buddha sees you. Not just you, through you. Some locals won't visit the statue at night. Not because they fear it, but because the stillness feels too ancient, too aware. Like the statue was meant to outlast the civilization that made it. Some believe it's more than a monument, that the Leshan Buddha is a memory or a message, carved to withstand flood, fire, and forgetfulness. A reminder from a time we no longer understand. Not just spiritual but technological, because behind every sacred carving, every hand-placed stone, there may be something much older and far more advanced than we allow ourselves to imagine. And maybe that's why he still sits, after 1,300 years, silent, the giants of Monte Perma, stone warriors of Sardinia. Out in the middle of the Mediterranean, on the rugged island of Sardinia, the land rolls gently, low hills, olive trees, fields of quiet grain. Nothing about the place screams giants, but not far from the town of Cabris, something strange began to appear beneath the earth. At first it was just pieces. A face here, a broken torso, the curve of a shield. Farmers digging through the soil kept striking stone, not boulders but carved fragments. Then in 1974 the earth gave up more. Buried beneath the farmland were the shattered remains of over 24 colossal statues, figures standing over 2 meters tall, eyes carved like concentric circles, unblinking, almost hypnotic, armor, swords, shields, warriors, boxers, archers, giants. They were unlike anything seen before in Europe, and they were old, very old. Carbon dating and archaeological context show that these statues were created sometime between the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, nearly 3,000 years ago. That's older than Rome, around the same time as early Greek civilization, but they weren't Greek. They were Sardinian, made by a people we still don't fully understand, the Nuragic civilization. And here's the strange part. Nothing like this had ever been found before. The Nuragic people were famous for their Nurig, massive stone towers and fortresses. But statues like these? Never. Not this size, not this detailed. Each figure was carefully carved from local limestone. Some stood upright holding large round shields, others carried bows. One even raised a clenched fist as if ready to strike. These weren't decorative pieces. They felt symbolic, like guardians, meant to last through time. But then comes the mystery. Why were they all broken? Every single statue was found in fragments. Heads separated from bodies, limbs torn off, torsos shattered. It wasn't time or weather that destroyed them. It was force. Archaeologists believe the statues were deliberately smashed. Some think it happened during a conflict, maybe when the Carthaginians invaded. Others believe it was part of a ritual, a symbolic act of closure, a way of ending something significant. Yet, despite the destruction, the statues weren't left scattered. They were buried purposefully. Whoever broke them didn't want them erased. They wanted them hidden, maybe even preserved, saved somehow for later. No one knows for sure, but the deeper we look, the stranger it gets. The site where the statues were discovered also contains ancient tombs, hundreds of stone-covered graves. Some of the statues were buried directly above these tombs, almost as if they were guardians watching over the dead. That raises an intriguing question. Were these statues meant to represent real warriors, ancestors, or something else entirely? Their features are stylized yet detailed: wide, unblinking eyes, calm, closed lips, braided or curled hair, and armor that doesn't match any known culture from that era. They look both familiar and foreign at the same time. Even their weapons are unusual: stone boxing gloves, curved blades, and large round shields bigger than the torsos behind them. The figures seem designed to intimidate but also to protect. And then there's their scale. These are the earliest large-scale statues ever discovered in the Mediterranean west of Greece. Nothing like them has ever been found in Italy, France, or Spain from that period. It's as if a forgotten civilization suddenly revealed it had mastered monumental sculpture centuries earlier than anyone thought possible. But how? No inscriptions were found near the statues, no written language to explain who made them, what they represented, or why they were placed the way they were. Archaeologists have had to piece together meaning from fragments. Each statue can take months, sometimes years, to reconstruct, matched by hand and scanned using modern technology. Yet the mystery only deepens. The more they excavate, the more statues appear. So far, over 40 complete figures and thousands of fragments have been uncovered, and there may be many more. Large sections of the site remain untouched, still lying beneath farmland, waiting. And within those fragments lies something even stranger. Some of the heads don't match the others. They're larger, heavier, rougher in their carving, and somehow older. Could they be prototypes? Or maybe they belong to an earlier phase, perhaps even a different people? Or could they represent something far more literal, real giants? That question lingers quietly at the edges of this discovery. Because in Sardinia, old legends still echo. Stories of I Giganti, the giants who once walked the island. Tales passed down through generations speak of giant warriors, enormous tombs, and forgotten battles. And for centuries, the locals said the statues were real, they just didn't know where they were. Until now. Some believe the statues were placed to mark a sacred ground, a spiritual space deeply tied to ancestry, a place where the dead were honored by guardians not of flesh, but of stone. Others think they were meant as a message, a declaration of strength and identity, proof that the Nuragic people were not primitive, but advanced, skilled builders, organizers, and artists. And yet, they vanished. No great Nuragic empire followed. No written chronicles or royal lineages. Only stone towers scattered across the hills. And now these statues. So what happened? Did they simply fade away, quietly absorbed into history? Were they conquered or assimilated? Or did they choose to disappear on their own terms, sealing their legacy beneath the earth, waiting for the right time to be remembered? Now, inside the museum in Cabris, the giants of Monte Prima stand once more, reassembled, silent, watching. But they don't look like museum exhibits. They still feel like guardians, as if they're waiting for something or for someone. Far away, in the forests of Tuscany, another giant keeps his silent watch. The Apennine Colossus, a river god carved from stone. Hidden deep within the quiet, overgrown gardens of Villa Demidov, not far from Florence, he waits. If you walk long enough through the mossy paths and crumbling fountains, you'll find him, half man, half mountain, draped in lichen, frozen in time. He leans forward over a pond, one massive hand pressing into the earth as if holding the world in place, his beard thick with moss. A reminder that even stone can seem alive. His skin is carved from stone, chipped, weathered, scarred by time. Yet his eyes still seem to see. He is the guardian of this strange, quiet place. A god of the mountains, a giant who never speaks, never moves, never leaves. but somehow he feels alive in a way no other statue does. Standing 35 feet tall, the Apennine Colossus was created in the late 1500s by Giambologna, one of the great sculptors of the Florentine Renaissance. But this was no ordinary commission. It wasn't meant for a cathedral or a royal palace. It was built for mystery. The Colossus was made for Francesco de' Medici, a prince obsessed with alchemy, symbolism, and hidden worlds. And fittingly, this giant is full of secrets, because the Colossus isn't just a statue. It's a piece of living architecture, a myth turned into stone. Inside the giant lies an entire network of rooms and passageways. You can actually walk through him. There's a chamber inside his head, another within his chest, and a spiral stairway hidden in one of his legs. Some of the inner chambers held fountains, others had small fireplaces, and one may have contained a secret grotto with a stream running through it. At one time, water would drip from his beard, flow from his fingers, and even spray from his mouth, turning the Colossus into a living fountain, a creature that seemed to breathe and move with water. But he wasn't built just to impress. He was made to symbolize something deeper, something ancient. The Apennine Mountains are the spine of Italy, long, wild, and eternal. The Colossus was created as their spirit made flesh, the embodiment of nature itself, not merely a man of stone, but the mountain made human. In his presence you feel something rare, a stillness that isn't empty, but aware. You feel watched, gently, as if he sees the world in slow motion, patient as the earth itself. Feels like time moves slower near him. The weather has worn him down. The moss, the stains, the cracks. But somehow, they've made him better, more real, more alive. And if you sit long enough by the pond he guards, you start to notice something strange. He doesn't feel like a statue placed in a garden. He feels like a being the garden grew around. Some say his expression changes depending on where you stand. From one angle, he looks sorrowful. From another, protective. His left arm curves around the mouth of a cave, which once held a stone serpent, coiled at his side like a companion or a guardian. Inside that cave lies another sealed chamber, believed to have once hosted private gatherings, secret rituals, or moments of silent reflection. The entire statue was part of a larger vision, a fusion of nature, art, and myth into one monumental form. But here's where it gets stranger. No records survive explaining its full meaning. No writings describe what each chamber was for. Even the original designs, if they ever existed, are gone. All that remains is stone, silence, and speculation. Some believe the Colossus was a symbol of humanity's bond with the earth, that walking inside him was meant to remind visitors we live within nature, not apart from it. Others think he was a secret alchemical monument, each chamber representing a stage of transformation. Earth, water, fire, air, and perhaps something beyond. And then there's another theory, that the Colossus was built to endure, long after everything else was gone. After the Medici family faded, after the fountains ran dry, after the villa crumbled into ruin, he would remain standing watch. And that's exactly what happened. The garden is overgrown. The buildings are dust. The other statues have cracked and fallen. But he is still there, through rain and snow, through wars and centuries. He has become part of the land itself. And when you stand before him now, it's hard to believe a human ever carved him. He feels too ancient, too patient, like something that was always there, older than Florence itself. Arkham, Russia's ancient spiral. Deep in the southern steppes of Russia, far from cities and motorways, the land opens into silence. The grass moves like waves. The sky stretches wide and pale, endless. There are no grand temples here, no towering pyramids. Only rolling hills, wind, and something buried beneath the earth. A pattern, a spiral, a structure that shouldn't exist, but does. This is Arkham, Discovered almost by accident in 1987, Arkham has become one of the most mysterious ancient settlements in all of Eurasia. Not from above, Arkham looks like a fingerprint pressed into the earth. A series of concentric circles, with carefully measured streets radiating outward and a central ring at its core, perfectly aligned with the path of the sun. And yet, this isn't modern. Not even medieval. It's over 4,000 years old, older than the Great Wall of China, older than most of Europe's recorded civilizations, contemporary with the pyramids of Egypt. And there it sits, in the middle of the Russian steppe, planned, engineered, deliberate. Who built it? That's the question that still haunts archaeologists. Most attribute Arkham to the Santashta culture, a Bronze Age people who lived on the edges of what we now call civilization. But the structure doesn't fit expectations. This wasn't a random cluster of huts or a simple settlement. It was a city designed with geometric precision. Its outer wall forms a nearly perfect circle, laid out with astonishing accuracy. Proof of minds that understood mathematics, astronomy, and engineering far beyond what anyone believed possible for their time. Built with timber frames, adobe, and stone, Arkham was unlike anything else from its time. Inside the settlement, 2 circular roads looped around the center, with homes and workshops arranged along the rings like teeth in a gear. Each household had its own hearth, its own storage space, and all were connected by an internal drainage system, a level of engineering remarkably advanced for the Bronze Age. At the very center lay a large open square, possibly used for rituals, gatherings, or perhaps something we still can't explain. The entire site was fortified, designed for defense, yet it also carried a deep astronomical purpose. Some call it the Russian Stonehenge because, like Stonehenge, Arkham aligns perfectly with the movements of the sun. Sunrise at the solstices, sunset at the equinoxes. But Arkham's alignment is even more precise. It appears that its builders used it to track time, to observe celestial cycles, to connect the heavens with the earth. But how? No writing has ever been found. No records. No clear explanation, only the structure, the bones, and the silence. At some point, the people of Arkham left or vanished. They didn't abandon the city in chaos. They burned it intentionally. The outer walls, the homes, everything scorched black by fire. Why would anyone build something so intricate only to destroy it? Some archaeologists believe it was a ritual act, that fire served as a kind of release, returning the settlement to the gods or to the earth. Others suspect something darker, war, disease, or collapse from within. Still, the spiral remains. And as more of it is uncovered, new theories keep emerging. Some speculative, some worth serious thought. What if Arkham wasn't just a settlement but something else, a map, a message, a machine? The symmetry is too perfect. The orientation too precise. The solar knowledge too advanced for a Bronze Age village with no writing, no central government, and no organized religion. And yet, the measurements are astonishingly exact, almost modern. Each sector of Arkham was identical, every home built to the same scale and proportion. There was balance, order, and a sense of design that went far beyond survival. It suggests a community that valued structure not just for defense, but for meaning. Some researchers believe Arkham was a spiritual center, a place where the stars were studied, not as distant points of light, but as living parts of daily existence. Others link it to the early Indo-European migrations, suggesting it may be one of the forgotten cradles of cultures that would one day become Persian, Indian, Slavic, and European. And then there are those who see something deeper, that the spiral itself holds a universal meaning. They say it mirrors the shapes of galaxies, of DNA, even of human consciousness. It's tempting to look at Arkham and see more than ruins, to see a message, left in stone and ash, a symbol of something humanity once understood, and then forgot. And the strange thing is, people feel it. Modern visitors describe Arkham as heavy, not frightening but weighty, as if the ground itself remembers. Standing in the spiral, it doesn't feel like just architecture, it feels like memory. At sunset, when the light hits the rings just right, the shadows stretch across the earth, and the center glows faintly in gold. For a moment, you can almost hear something beneath the wind. Not words, not language, but a presence. It feels as if something sacred happened here, as if the builders truly knew what they were doing. This spiral wasn't just a place to live. It was a place to understand, to belong, to connect the sky with the soil. Now, all that remains is the pattern in the earth, the whisper of the wind, and the question that lingers. What else have we forgotten? Eindara, the lion-footed giant. In the far north of Syria, where the dry winds whisper across ancient stones and the distant mountains watch in silence, there once stood a place no one expected. A site that held secrets far older and stranger than anyone imagined. A site so quiet, so forgotten by modern eyes, and yet it housed something that seems too large, too precise, too deliberate, to be just a myth. This place is known as Eindara. At first glance, the ruins here look similar to other ancient temples. Carved stones, weather-worn columns, a stairway leading into emptiness. But take a few steps closer, and you'll see what starts to set Eindara apart: enormous footprints. Footprints carved into the very stone, but not human-sized, not even close. One print stretches nearly 3 feet long, and then just a few paces ahead, another equally massive embedded into solid basalt. It's not just one. There's a pattern, as if some enormous being had strolled across the threshold, entering what was once the main temple hall. These are not random carvings. The stride, the depth, the deliberate positioning, it's unsettling. It's like whoever or whatever left these marks was meant to be remembered. The temple itself is believed to have been constructed sometime around 1300 BCE, possibly by the Arameans. The structure is adorned with guardian lions and sphinxes. Its architecture echoes that of Solomon's temple, which some scholars say was built much later. That's what's strange. How could an isolated temple in Syria predate and resemble something from biblical lore? But let's go back to the footprints. They aren't just giant, they are anatomical. Toes, heel, arch, and they're right where a giant would place its feet if it were climbing the stairs. They're not scattered randomly. They seem intentional, as though they were carved. In local legend, the temple belonged to Ishtar, the Mesopotamian goddess of love and war. Ishtar, often depicted as part human, part divine, is said to have towered above ordinary people. But some believe the temple wasn't built for a goddess. It was built by beings like her. Across the ancient world, there are stories of giants, beings that stood shoulder to shoulder with the mountains. Their stories cross continents, from the Nephilim in the Hebrew texts to the Anunnaki in Mesopotamian myths. Some even believe these beings walked the earth long before humanity rose. Could the footprints at Eindara be a physical echo of these beings? Let's pause here. Imagine standing at the entrance to the temple. The stones are cracked, the columns worn down by wind and time. The sun sets in the distance, casting long warm shadows across the floor. You glance down and you see it. This massive footmark, etched so deeply into the stone, it couldn't have been faked without tremendous effort. You take a few steps forward and find the next footprint. Same shape, same stride. It doesn't feel like a prank. It doesn't feel like symbolism. It feels like someone or something really walked there. Something far larger than any person we've ever known. Now imagine what that would mean. It would mean that somewhere in the deep fog of history, there were beings of a scale we've only whispered about in bedtime stories. And Eindara? It might just be their last footprint, etched not just in stone but in time. Some archaeologists suggest the prints were symbolic, that they represented the steps of gods entering their temple. A ritual carving not meant to be literal. But here's the thing. Other temples of the same era didn't leave these markers. Indara is almost alone in this footprint tradition. And those guardian lions? They're huge too. Their heads once stood nearly as tall as a man. The doors into the temple were massive, far larger than needed for average human visitors. Were they built for show or for beings that towered over us? There's also the question of who built this and why it was forgotten. The records are sparse. What we know is based on fragments, both literal and historical. The temple was abandoned long before modern times, and most of its secrets were buried under soil and rubble until it was excavated in the 20th century. In recent years, conflict in Syria has caused tragic damage to the site. Bombings have destroyed portions of the temple, and much of the lion imagery has been lost. But the footprints, they remain. Solid, defiant, mysterious. Is it possible the ancients carved those prints to remember beings they'd actually seen? Maybe they worshipped these giants. Maybe they feared them. Or maybe those prints weren't a tribute at all, but something left behind by something real. At night, when the stars rise above the desert, a colossal figure, walking silently toward the temple, each step sending a low rumble through the ground. The people watching from below, in awe or in silence, maybe even recording it the only way they knew how, by carving its footprints into eternal stone. Whatever the truth may be, Indara remains a riddle. A quiet, dusty place in northern Syria, a temple now mostly ruins, a few surviving carvings, 2 massive footprints, and a question that has never been answered. Who or what left those prints behind? Until someone proves otherwise, the lion-footed giant of Indara will remain one of the most unsettling and silent stories in ancient history. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how it was meant to be. Neragelosa, Tower of the Ancients. There's something about Sardinia that feels older than time. The wind here doesn't just blow, it carries whispers. The land doesn't just lie still, it watches. And in the heart of this ancient island, on a quiet plain far from the rush of cities, there stands a structure that looks more like a fossilized thought than a man-made building. It's massive, dark, and heavy with silence. That's Neragelosa. This stone tower, circular, stoic, and strangely alive, has been here for more than 3,000 years. It has no written story, no inscriptions to tell us who built it or why. Yet it still stands, as if simply being here was enough. Built during the Bronze Age by the Neragic people, who remain one of the most mysterious cultures in Europe, Neragelosa is one of over 7,000 such towers scattered across Sardinia. But this one is different, more intact, more commanding, and somehow more silent than the rest. Like it's keeping something. Its walls are thick, some places more than 3 meters deep. Inside, you enter through a narrow corridor that feels like you're being swallowed by stone. The air cools, the sound softens. You are now inside a mind that has stopped thinking, but has never forgotten. No one knows exactly what the Nerogi were for. Some say they were fortresses. Others believe they were temples or observatories or even tombs. But when you're standing inside Neragelosa, all those labels seem too small. It doesn't feel like a place meant for war or worship. It feels like a presence. Something that watched over the land, not to dominate it, but to remember it. There are no straight lines here. The inner chambers are curved. The passageways coil like thoughts, turning in on themselves. There's a strange geometry to it, something you can feel in your bones, but not explain in words. Step inside one of the Tholos chambers and look up. The corbelled ceiling spirals into darkness. No cement, no support beams, just stone on stone, holding weight for over 3 millennia. How did they know how to do this? How did they get these stones so perfectly shaped, so tightly interlocked, without metal tools or written plans, and why? Around the Nirogi, archaeologists have found remnants of houses, roads, even other towers. A whole settlement once yet, there's a quiet sadness to it all, like something ended too soon, or was meant to be hidden. Some researchers point out how the Nerigit towers align with the sun during solstices. Others see constellations reflected in their layout. Still others believe these towers were part of a larger island-wide communication network. Signals passed through fire or mirrors or sound. If true, Sardinia once had an intelligence system more advanced than many parts of mainland Europe. But the mystery deepens when you realize this culture, the Nerigit civilization, left behind no writing, no scrolls, no books, not even carved messages. It's as if they trusted the stone more than words, as if memory was better preserved in silence than speech. Today the Nerigelosa stands fenced and protected, but rarely visited. Tourists drift through with polite curiosity. Locals nod at it, like an old friend they've known their whole lives, but never really spoken to. And then there are those who feel something else, an itch behind the eyes, a whisper in the bones, as if the tower recognizes them, as if they've been here before. In recent years, some archaeologists have proposed wild ideas. Could the Niroga be connected to ancient sea traders? To lost Mediterranean peoples? Some even whisper of Atlantis. But the tower says nothing. It just stands as it always has. At night, the Nerigelosa looks even more surreal. With the stars overhead and the silence all around, it blends into the landscape like a thought rising from the earth itself. A thought made of stone and time. It's easy to forget how far back it goes. When this tower was built, the pyramids were still young. Rome didn't exist. Greece had not yet dreamed of gods. And yet someone on this quiet island was stacking stones with such precision, such confidence, that their work still stands untouched by time. Whatever purpose it once had, it served it well. And now it watches. From the hill in Sardinia, the Tower of the Ancients stands not just as a relic of a forgotten people, but as a reminder that long before our stories began, other hands were already building. And perhaps, just perhaps, they left behind more than we know. Tula Atlanteans, stone warriors. They stand still, unmoving, beneath the endless blue sky of Mexico's highlands. Massive, watchful, for stone warriors, each over 15 feet tall, silhouetted against the sun like ancient guardians of something long forgotten. This is Tula, once the capital of the Toltecs, a city whispered about in Nahuatl legends. And here, in the heart of what was once sacred ground, these towering figures, known simply as the Atlanteans, remain. No one truly knows how they got here, why they were built, or even exactly when, but their presence is undeniable. It's almost like they're waiting. If you stand close enough, their faces seem less like statues, and more like memories carved into volcanic stone. You begin to wonder, who were these warriors meant to honor? Were they real men once revered as gods? Or were they imagined guardians, dreamed into being by an ancient people who understood how to work with lava rock and align structures with the stars? Some believe they were also warriors of terrifying precision, disciplined, and powerful. The city of Tula, which thrived between the 9th and 12th centuries, was built with a kind of order that speaks to knowledge of the earth, the skies, and of geometry itself, not random, never random. The Atlantean statues rest on the Pantocutli, that name, a mouthful now, once held deep cosmic meaning, the house of the morning star, or simply the god Venus. From this height, the warriors once looked out over vast ceremonial grounds, a city buzzing with chants, incense smoke, and the silent turning of stone gears we can no longer hear. Each statue is carved with armor, chest plates, belts, and headdresses, and in their hands they hold mysterious implements. Some say these are Atlatls, ancient spear throwers. Others suggest symbolic weapons, carved to show strength or ritual power. But what really puzzles researchers isn't just their size or detail, it's how advanced the craftsmanship is for their time. These aren't crude figures, they have symmetry, form, and presence. They were engineered to last, and they have. When you stand before them, something strange happens, the world quiets, your breath slows, and even if you didn't believe in ancient mysteries, for just a moment you might feel like these giants know something you don't. Not far from this site, alignments in the Toltec architecture show a familiarity with celestial patterns. Venus again plays a central role. It seems the heavens were not decorations to the Toltecs, but guides, calendars, clocks, omens, and if that's true, then the Atlanteans may have been more than statues. Maybe they were sentinels, tracking the sky for signs. Maybe they were part of some enormous ceremonial machine we no longer understand. Of course, over time, Tula fell. The rise of the Aztecs centuries later buried the Toltec legacy under new mythologies. The Atlanteans faded into the background of stories. Gods of wind, warriors of the sun, spirits of forgotten wars. But they never left. Through sun and storm, conquest and collapse, they stayed exactly where they had always stood. And even now, if you visit them, especially near dusk, you'll notice something quietly surreal. As the sky darkens and wind begins to move across the stones, the Atlanteans almost feel alive, like they're not just statues, but echoes of something larger. A moment, maybe, that never ended. A riddle carved in volcanic rock. Some locals believe they were meant to awaken someday, that they were created to guard something yet to come, that they're not statues at all but a warning. But perhaps they're just watchers, unblinking, silent, waiting for a world that still doesn't understand who really shaped them or why. Because in this part of the world, myths aren't just remembered, they're built into the land. And in the shadows of the Atlanteans, where sun and history blur into something dreamlike, the mystery remains. Not loud, never loud, but always there. Petra, city carved in rock. In the quiet hush of the Jordanian desert, where the sandstone cliffs hold the warmth of 1,000 forgotten sunsets, a pathway narrows between towering walls of stone. It twists and winds like a secret being whispered by the earth itself. This passage, known as the Sick, leads not to a castle or a temple in the traditional sense, but to something far stranger. Petra. It doesn't arrive all at once. The city reveals itself in pieces, like an old story told slowly. First a glimpse of something smooth, then lines, columns, a shadow that doesn't belong to the rock. And finally, the facade, the treasury, Alcazna, a 100. It doesn't look like something humans should have been able to make. Not there, not then, but someone did. And no one can say exactly how. The Nabateans, they tell us, a civilization that thrived more than 2,000 years ago. Traders, skilled in engineering and water management, artists of stone and silence. But what they left behind is not a town, not even a city in the usual sense. It feels like a dream sculpted into the rock. And in many ways, it behaves like one. There are over 800 individual monuments carved into the cliffs, tombs, temples, dwellings, ceremonial platforms, staircases leading nowhere. It's as if an entire city was etched into the mountain's memory. And even after centuries of sandstorms and erosion, it still stares back, unfinished, untouched, and completely unreal. Walk deeper and you'll notice something strange. It's quiet, the kind of quiet that presses gently against your ears. Even when tourists are nearby, Petra doesn't echo the way other ruins do. It absorbs sound like it's listening, and maybe it is. The Nabateans had no written records that survived. What we know about them comes from ruins and guesses, interpretations of carved symbols, inscriptions in multiple languages, and water channels so precisely engineered that some still function today. But the greatest mystery lies in the scale and precision. The treasury isn't just decorative, it's mathematically symmetrical. The columns, the friezes, the inner chambers, all cut into rock so precisely it's hard to imagine they didn't use machines. Yet there's no evidence they did. How did they carve into cliffs that tall without scaffolding as we know it? How did they maintain alignment in stone that soft? One miscalculation and the facade could have cracked. But it didn't. Some believe Petra wasn't just a hub, it was a kind of cosmic city. That the placement of buildings aligned with stars or solstices. That the sounds within certain chambers carry resonance with ancient musical or ritual frequencies. That it wasn't just a place to live or die, but a place to ascend. The monastery, one of Petra's largest structures, sits even farther out. A long uphill walk through switchbacks leads to it, and when you arrive, something shifts. The air is thinner, the view more expansive. The structure itself is simpler than the treasury, but its size is breathtaking. Standing in its shadow, you can't help but wonder, was it for people at all, or was it made for something else? They say the Nabateans worshipped Dushra, a god of the mountains, and Aluzza, a goddess associated with fertility and protection. Some statues hint at figures, but most of Petra's sacred places were iconic, without human or animal images, just shapes, cubes, pillars, altars that suggest the divine but do not depict it. It's as if they didn't want to show the gods, they wanted to invite them. Further in, there are places even archaeologists hesitate to interpret. Small openings high in cliffs, too remote for normal access. Chambers with steps carved upward into blank walls. Symbols that seem universal, spirals, stars. Even the water system is strange. Complex aqueducts and cisterns brought water through miles of desert. Some channels are cut so deeply and precisely that it's unclear how they were maintained. Petra wasn't just carved, it was engineered. But how a culture of nomadic traders mastered both art and infrastructure at this scale remains unsolved. When the Romans arrived in the 1st century, they admired Petra, but they never matched its style. Later earthquakes damaged the site, and shifting trade routes left it forgotten. By the time European explorers stumbled upon it in the 1800s, it had already become legend. Locals knew of it, of course, they always had, but they didn't speak of it much. Some said it was haunted, others called it the City of Ghosts, a place built not by hands but by spirits or jinn. And when you stand in front of the treasury at sunrise or sunset, that feels entirely possible. There's something about Petra that refuses to be completely known. Its greatest secrets are carved not just into the cliffs, but into the silence between them. You can walk its paths for days and still feel like you've missed the point. Because maybe you have. Maybe Petra wasn't built to be understood. Maybe it was built to remind us that we never really knew the world to begin with. And in the stillness of the night, when the desert wind flows like breath through the Siki, Petra sleeps. Not as ruins, not as memory, but as a living stone dream, still holding its mysteries, just beneath the surface. Constantine's colossal statue, Rome's legacy. In the quiet heart of ancient Rome, under the soft light of a setting sun, there once stood a statue so vast, so impossible in scale, that it made onlookers feel like mere fragments of dust in the presence of something divine. Today there are only pieces, a hand, a foot, a portion of the face. Each fragment is enormous on its own, towering over visitors at Capitol and museums. And yet, they are just echoes of what once was. This was the Colossus of Constantine. When it stood whole, the statue may have reached over 40 feet high, crafted in marble and bronze, seated in a throne. Constantine gazed forward, his eyes unnaturally large, staring not at the people, but toward an idea, perhaps toward eternity. But what was this statue meant to represent? A man, yes, a ruler, but also something more, a turning point in history, when Rome began shifting from the old gods to a new faith, from classical empire to Christian authority. The 4th century was a time of enormous transition. Constantine the Great wasn't just a politician or a general. He became a symbol of unification, of reform, and of the first emperor to embrace Christianity. And in this great marble figure, cast in overwhelming scale, we see not just Constantine, but the ambition of an empire trying to immortalize itself in stone. The colossal statue was originally located in the Basilica of Maxentius, the largest building in the Roman Forum. Imagine walking into that vast space, stone columns rising high above you, light filtering through coffered ceilings, and at the far end, a godlike emperor seated on a throne, looking down upon all. No one could ignore it, no one was meant to. This wasn't just sculpture, it was storytelling. Rome was telling its citizens, and the world, that it would last forever, that its emperor had transcended human form, that even as temples crumbled and armies fell, the empire's soul would live on through the divine presence of its leader. But it didn't last. Time is ruthless, empires fall, statues break, bronze is stripped away for other wars, buildings are the head, nearly 8 feet tall, the hand curled gently upward, once holding a scepter, or perhaps the symbol of imperial power. The foot, massive and still planted firmly, like the empire never left. They lie now in a quiet courtyard in Rome. Tourists walk past them, some in awe, others barely aware of what they're seeing. But those who linger, those who pause, feel something. It's not just admiration, it's a strange kind of memory, almost like the stone itself remembers what it used to be. If you stand close to the statue's face and look into the carved eyes, you might feel the cold smoothness of marble, but also something deeper, a sensation that you're not just looking at a face but at a fragment of forgotten power. Not the kind that controls armies, but the kind that tries to rewrite time itself. Because this wasn't just art, this was propaganda in stone. Rome, in its dying moments, was trying to tell its own story, in a way that could not be burned, could not be silenced. And even though the statue has shattered, that message lingers. The Colossus was likely destroyed during the sackings of Rome, or perhaps simply taken apart over centuries for materials. No one knows for sure, but what we do know is that its fragments survived. Somehow they slipped through time's fingers. Now they sit beneath the open sky. No throne, no temple, just marble resting on the ground. And still, they speak. Not in words but in scale, not in detail but in presence. You can close your eyes and imagine how it might have looked. Bronze shimmering in torchlight, Constantine's face gazing forward, the entire basilica hushed in reverence or fear. This was not just a man, it was a moment in history when Rome tried to become eternal. And even now, under the soft Roman breeze, it almost feels like it did, like time itself paused, just for a moment, to admire what humans are capable of building, and what we always seem to lose. So if you ever find yourself wandering those ancient courtyards in Rome, slow your step, take a moment, stand beside the foot, look up at the head, let the quiet settle in around you, and listen. The empire may be gone, but its whispers remain, carved in marble, waiting to be heard. The giant of Monterosso, cliffside titan. If you were to wander along the rugged coastline of Italy's Cinque Terre, following the sound of the waves that roll like soft thunder against the cliffs, eventually, you'd come across something strange, something massive, and yet, somehow quiet. At first glance, it almost blends into the rock, its shape softened by time, by salt, by the wind that never quite stops moving across this stretch of sea. But if you look closer, you'll see a man, no, a giant, a figure carved into the stone of the cliffs themselves. His face is stern, his shoulders are broad, his arms stretch toward the weight of something long lost. A trident? A seashell? A temple? No one remembers for sure. This is the giant of Monterosso, and for the longest time no one really spoke of him. Tourists passed by, locals glanced up, but the giant didn't move. He simply remained, crumbling, forgotten, fused into the cliffs like a memory that refuses to leave. But this giant has a story. He was once the guardian of a villa, a lavish home built at the edge of the world where sea and stone met in a quiet truce. The villa was called Villa Pastine. It was the pride of its owner, an elegant home where artists were invited, and at its edge, anchoring the house to legend, was the colossal Neptune, god of the sea, sculpted into the cliffside, in 1910, carved from iron and concrete, holding aloft a seashell once large enough to be mistaken for a rooftop. A being of both mythology and modern artistry. The man behind the sculpture was Origo Minorbi, an Italian sculptor whose hands shaped the forgotten gods of a new century. Alongside the engineer Levature, he created this Neptune not just as art but as presence. A reminder of the old gods, the sea gods, the ones that watched long before our cities had names. But as with so many monuments, time had other plans. The villa, grand as it was, did not survive. World War II came like a shadow across the coastline. Bombings, shrapnel, and destruction shattered the once proud structure. The giant Neptune too suffered. His trident was lost. His arms, those once so powerful, were torn away. The seashell crumbled. And yet his face remained. His body, though broken, stayed rooted to the cliff. Even now, if you walk along the beach at Vagina, you can look up and see him. What's left of him, emerging from the rock like some ancient sentinel. Weathered, yes, but unmistakably there. And this is where the mystery deepens. Because while the giant has a known date, 1910, it feels much older. Confuses the mind. There's something almost prehistoric about it. Almost too perfect for its time. Many wonder, why Neptune? Why that design? Was it really just for decoration? Or was there something older beneath? A much older legend, one borrowed from sailors and passed down in silence. Some local stories speak of a sea guardian long before the sculpture was created. An unseen spirit of the cliffs, a protector of the waters. When the sculptor came, they say, he simply gave form to what was already there, like pulling a face out of the stone that had always been waiting. There are whispers, too, of unusual patterns carved faintly around the base. Symbols worn so thin they look like natural erosion, until you realize they curve with intent. Spirals, lines. Some claim they're Etruscan, others say older still. But they're almost impossible to date, because the concrete surface has since fused with the natural cliff. Stone and sculpture have become one. And then there's the matter of the proportions. Some architects and historians have pointed out something strange. The giant's original design would have required unnatural strength just to support itself. The base is too narrow, the upper body far too heavy. In fact, the way it was built defies some of the conventional weight distributions used even in modern sculpture. It should have collapsed, but it didn't. So they ask, was there an older frame? Something within the cliff that supported it? Something not entirely man-made? We may never know. The structure has been patched, repaired, and stabilized over the decades. But certain parts, especially those embedded deep within, have never been fully examined. Permission is hard to get. The rock is fragile. Still, when the waves are high and the moon is full, some say the giant of Monterosso almost seems to shift. His face changes in the shadows. His form catches the starlight in a way that doesn't feel random. Feels like he's still watching, still protecting something. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real purpose of the giant was never to impress visitors or decorate a villa. Maybe it was to remind us, subtly, silently, that we are never truly alone on these cliffs. That long before we built homes and painted stories on canvas, we carved our myths into the stone itself. The giant of Monterosso doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He's part of the landscape now, part of the wind, part of the salt in the air and the rhythm of the waves below. His arms may be gone, his trident lost, But he's still there, still looking out over the Ligurian Sea, waiting perhaps for someone to remember why he was made in the first place. So the next time you find yourself walking along that quiet Italian coastline, don't rush. Pause for a moment, look up at the cliffs, and listen, because sometimes, in the slow hush between waves, the old gods still whisper. The giant Buddha of Bamiyan, Afghanistan. You are standing in a silent valley. The air is still. The mountains around you rise like quiet sentinels, their layers telling stories older than memory. You look ahead, and carved into the rock, a shape begins to emerge. It's no ordinary carving. It's not decoration. It's not an accidental pattern made by time and erosion. It's a giant, a statue, a Buddha, and it's watching over the valley, as if it has always been there, as if it never needed to be made because it was always part of the mountain. This is Bamiyan, a place in central Afghanistan, surrounded by cliffs and ancient dust, where the past is not buried beneath the earth. It's carved into the face of the rock itself. For nearly 1,500 years, two massive statues stood here. One measured 35 meters tall, the other even more massive, about 53 meters. That's as tall as an 18-story building. But the most extraordinary part isn't just their size. It's how they were made, where they were made, and what they represented. These weren't statues built on flat ground. They were carved directly into the vertical walls of the cliff. They were hollowed out from within. The head, the robes, the shoulders, even the platforms they stood on. Everything was shaped from the stone of the mountain itself. No cranes, no modern tools, just raw vision and relentless effort. We don't know exactly who built them. Some believe it was around the 5th or 6th century CE. That's more than 1,400 years ago. Others say it may have begun even earlier, possibly during the Kushan Empire, when Buddhist influence swept through Central Asia. But whoever did it, whoever planned it, climbed it, carved it, and risked their lives, what they left was presence. If you stood at the foot of one of these Buddhas and looked up, you wouldn't feel small in the way you might near a skyscraper. You'd feel small in the way you do when you look up at the stars. Quiet, humbled, like you're in the presence of something that isn't trying to impress you. It simply is. And maybe that was the point. The Bamiyan Buddhas were not just religious icons. They were gateways, portals for reflection. For centuries, travelers on the Silk Road would pass through this valley. Some came from India, others from Persia, China, even Rome. And when they passed these towering figures, carved into the mountain, they didn't see monuments to power. They saw invitations to slow down, to breathe, to witness. The valley became a cultural crossroads. Around the statues, dozens of caves were carved into the cliffs. Some were meditation cells, some were shrines. Inside them you'd find faded paintings, murals with brilliant colors, now barely clinging to the walls. These were stories in pigment, stories of the Buddha's life, of monks in prayer, of travelers seeking peace. And just outside, the statues stood watch. Imagine the effort it would have taken to shape them, day after day, carving through stone by hand, hanging from ropes, chiseling while wind whipped through the valley. Every angle had to be perfect, every inch planned. The robes that draped over the Buddha's bodies weren't simple straight lines. They flowed, they folded, they rippled with weight and detail. But even more mysterious is how the interiors were constructed. Because these statues were hollow. Inside, staircases were carved, chambers were built, windows were placed to let light stream in from the outside. In some ways they weren't statues at all, they were vertical temples. And then there's the face. The faces are gone now, lost. And so are the statues themselves. Because in 2001, after standing for over 1,000 years, both Buddhas were destroyed. It was one of the most heartbreaking acts of cultural erasure in modern history. The Taliban, calling the statues idols, used explosives and artillery to reduce them to rubble. The world watched. Some wept. Others protested. But the damage was done. And yet, even in their absence, the Buddhas of Bamiyan remain. The empty niches where they once stood are still carved into the cliff. And something strange happens when you look into those hollows. You still feel their presence. It's as if the memory of the stone is stronger than the stone itself. The valley hasn't forgotten, and neither have the people. In the years since the destruction, archaeologists have discovered fragments, pieces of the Buddhas, fingers, robes, facial features, scattered in the dust below. Efforts have been made to reconstruct what once was, not to rebuild them as they were, but to understand how they were made, to remember what they meant. And what did they mean? That's the part no history book can fully answer. To others, they were masterpieces of engineering and sculpture. But to the quiet traveler standing at the base, eyes turned upward in the still air, they were something else. They were reminders. Reminders that the greatest structures don't always rise from ambition, but from devotion. That true giants don't always walk the earth. They can be carved into it. That silence can sometimes speak more than sound. Even now, standing in front of the voids, you can almost hear the wind as it brushes across the cliffside. You can almost see what was once there. You can almost feel it. And that's the strange magic of Bamiyan. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't force emotion. It just offers space. Space to reflect, space to imagine, space to wonder what else might have once stood in valleys like this, before time or war or memory erased the rest. The Bamiyan Buddhas may be gone, but their shadows still stretch across the valley, not in sorrow, but in stillness. And sometimes, stillness is all we need to remember. The stone giants of Palmyra, Syria. In the middle of what is now desert, where dry winds blow across sun-baked stones, and the silence carries the weight of centuries, there once stood a city unlike any other, a place of wealth, art, and towering pride. That place was Palmyra, and within its majestic ruins, stone giants still whisper of a forgotten past. You wouldn't know it from looking at it now. The sand creeps in slowly, the columns are shattered, the archways half gone. But when you close your eyes and just listen to the air move across the broken statues, it feels like something bigger still lingers here. Before Rome reached its full height, before great cities rose across Europe, Palmyra had already carved its name in stone. It was more than a city, it was a symbol, a trade center, a cultural meeting point, a stage for gods and emperors to cross paths. And rising among the temples and gates and columns, there were these massive stone figures, many of them human-shaped, but unlike anything we recognize, with features too serene, eyes too wide, shoulders too square, and a silence too heavy for simple sculpture. Some called them gods, others thought they were kings, but the truth is no one really knows because their faces were carved with care, but without names. Their hands placed at their sides as if waiting, always waiting. Even in ruin, they don't look defeated. They look like they're still watching. Palmyra was built on oasis land. That alone made it special in ancient Syria. Because when you can control the water in a desert, you control life itself, and with that came power. These people were merchants and architects, priests and traders. They knew how to build, and they built to impress. They didn't just stack stone, they designed with meaning. Symbols were etched into the surfaces. Gods from many cultures were welcomed. Even their burial towers were built like giant beacons, silent guardians looking over the land. And then came the statues. Some were set into temples. Others lined the colonnades. But a few, the ones that still stir the imagination, were larger than life. Sculpted from single blocks of limestone or sandstone, sometimes 15 feet high, sometimes more, their bodies were human, But the way they stood, the way they faced the horizon or faced each other, it didn't feel like art, it felt like a conversation. Or maybe we have no names for the hands that shaped these giants, no records that explain what the poses meant, but we do know that Palmyrene sculpture was unlike anything else in the Roman world. More stylized, more geometric, almost like they were borrowing ideas from somewhere older, somewhere more distant. The eyes were always wide, almost too wide, not realistic but exaggerated, as if the sculptors wanted them to see beyond time. The clothing, detailed and deliberate, sometimes Persian in style, sometimes resembling Greek robes, sometimes nothing you can really place. And over the centuries, as empires came and went, those stone giants didn't fall, they stayed standing. Until recently, in the 21st century, tragedy struck, conflict came to Syria, and Palmyra, once a wonder of the ancient world, became a battlefield. The Temple of Bel destroyed, the Arch of Triumph collapsed, and the statues, many of them were beheaded, shattered, or vanished. But even in that destruction, something strange happened. Some of the heads were taken and hidden by locals who risked their lives to preserve them. Some fragments were buried under the rubble, protected by accident, and as archaeologists returned, they began to realize something profound. Even broken, even crushed and burned, the giants still evoke presence. A single hand, carved in stone, resting open. A face, split down the middle, still wearing its expression. Eyes chipped but unblinking, and the stories return. Legends say that some of the statues in Palmyra weren't just statues. They marked sacred places. Energy points, watchposts built not for humans, but for something else, something older. There's a theory that Palmyra was built on the foundations of a far earlier civilization, that the oldest parts of the city reuse stones from structures long gone. The way some of the statues differ, some almost alien in shape, supports the idea that Palmyra's builders were inheriting a mystery they didn't fully understand themselves. We see this in the positioning of certain ruins, in the way the columns align with celestial bodies, in how some statues seem out of place, as if they were moved or relocated from a more ancient source. The idea of stone memory starts to make sense here, that maybe, just maybe, the statues weren't just carved, they were passed down, and Palmyra was simply the last hand to hold them. There's one sculpture in particular that still gives researchers pause. A giant male figure, headless now, once stood inside a partially collapsed temple near the agora. He held nothing in his hands. His arms were to his sides, his feet slightly turned out. Simple still, but his scale was wrong. Too large for the rest of the architecture. Too finely finished compared to the surrounding blocks. And the stone type? Not from that region, so where did he come from? No one knows. It's been suggested that he might have originally stood outside the city, a marker for travelers or a guardian, and was later brought in. Others say he was already ancient when the Palmyranas placed him, that they didn't make him, they just honored him. And that's the mystery. These statues, these giants, weren't all made by one hand, or even one culture. They survived multiple civilizations. They were witnesses to empires. And when Palmyra itself was swallowed by the desert, the giants stayed behind, as if keeping the memory alive. Now when visitors return, and the ruins are quiet again, people say they still feel it. A stillness that doesn't feel empty, but full, like the statues are remembering for us. Because maybe that's what they were always meant to do. Not to celebrate kings, not to show beauty, but to hold time, to remind us that long before we arrived, and long after we leave, the stones will still be standing, watching, waiting, whispering a story too old to write down. And that is the legacy of the stone giants of Palmyra. The megalithic fortress of Alitri, Italy. In the heart of Italy, where modern streets weave through ancient towns and olive trees ripple in the sunlight, there's a place that seems to belong to a different timeline altogether. A place where the earth itself appears to have been folded and shaped by some long-lost hand. This is Alitri, a peaceful town perched atop a hill. At first glance, it feels like any other Italian village. But when you walk a little higher, When you let your steps lead you to its oldest stones, something changes. You begin to notice how the walls curve with a kind of intelligence. Not the intelligence of the Renaissance or the Romans. Older, more primal. As if the stones themselves had been grown, not built. These are the megalithic walls of Alatri, massive, mysterious, perfect. Each block is a puzzle, huge, irregular, yet somehow fitted together without gaps, without mortar, and without error. Some of these stones weigh dozens of tons. They've never been moved since they were first placed. They haven't needed to be. They endure, silent and still, as if time forgot to touch them. When you stand in front of these walls, your eyes try to trace the outlines of the stones. Your mind races to make sense of it because nothing about them feels normal. Modern engineers have studied them and shrugged. Archaeologists have written about them and argued endlessly. No one has agreed on how these walls were made. Theories stretch across centuries, from Etruscan builders to even older unknown civilizations. Some whisper of lost knowledge, of techniques we no longer possess. There's something hypnotic about the way the stones lock together. Not one is the same shape, yet each fits precisely, as if whoever built them understood the geometry of pressure and time. No binding agents, just mass, weight, and a design too advanced for its era. The oldest parts of the Alatri walls are thought to predate Rome by centuries, possibly millennia, and yet they show none of the roughness you'd expect from ancient construction. There's elegance in their brutal simplicity. The fortress, known as the Acropolis, stands on the highest point of the town. From there it looks down not just over Alatri but over time itself. This is not just architecture, this is memory carved in stone. There's more. In the layout of the walls, some researchers have claimed to see patterns, a star shape, astronomical alignments, possible references to Orion. Subtle, just hints, but it's enough to spark questions. Was this site chosen for a reason? Were the builders watching the skies? Did they align these stones with the heavens? Beneath the fortress lies a complex network of alleys and underground rooms. Some are closed off, others remain unexcavated. The people who live here don't think much of it anymore. To them, it's always been part of the town, but for outside, it's a living place built around something prehistoric. The stones have survived countless invasions, earthquakes, empires. They were here before Julius Caesar, before Latin, before the very concept of Italy. And yet, they don't boast. They don't shout for attention. They're just there, monumental and silent, like an ancient truth waiting to be rediscovered. Some scholars suggest that the builders used wooden rollers and levers. Others believe they shaped smaller stones until they found the perfect match. But the scale and the uniformity argue against that. It feels more like the work of a people who understood stone at a level we no longer do. And that's the strangest part. These walls are not alone. Similar structures exist in other parts of Italy. Norba, Ferentino, Segni, even across the sea in Greece and Turkey. But Alatri stands apart. It is better preserved, more massive, more precise. And it carries an energy that's hard to describe. Not spiritual exactly, just present. As you walk the perimeter of the fortress, you start to feel small, not in a fearful way, in a respectful one. As if you've entered a place where the laws of effort and intention are different. As if once, long ago, people could look at a mountain and see potential, and then shape that mountain into a message. Some have argued that these walls are part of a forgotten civilization, one that predates recorded history, perhaps wiped out by some ancient catastrophe. Others think it was simply human determination, stretched across generations. Maybe both are true. But one thing is certain. The fortress of Alatri wasn't built for defense alone. Its design suggests something deeper, symbolic, celestial, ceremonial. Perhaps it was meant to endure, to be remembered, to outlast the very people who created it. Today you can still walk among those stones. You can press your palm against their surface and feel their texture, smooth in some places, chipped in others. You can follow the shadows that fall between the blocks, watch how the light plays across their edges. And when you're alone, standing there as the sun sets and the wind rises through the hills, you might just feel it, that lingering presence, that echo of something ancient. A memory that has no words, only weight, only stone. Because the fortress of Alatri is not just a wall. It is a question carved into the earth. A mystery that has stood for thousands of years, and might stand for thousands more. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what it was always meant to be. The giant pharaohs of Luxor, Ramesses II statues, Egypt. In the deep silence of the Egyptian desert, where golden sands have watched over history for thousands of years, there lies a place where time stretches and legends walk among stone. Luxor, a city of pharaohs, mysteries, and immense statues that defy both logic and erosion. Here, among ruined temples and whispering winds, the giant likenesses of Ramesses II still stand, carved in stone. You don't need to imagine a city built for gods. Luxor is that city. Once known as Thebes, it was the ancient capital of Egypt during its golden era. But it's not the city layout that strikes you first. It's the sheer scale, monuments so large they seem impossible, statues so precise, yet so gigantic that they make even modern engineers pause in disbelief. Among these monuments stands one of the most remarkable figures in human history, Ramesses II, the pharaoh who ruled for 66 years. His presence still lingers in Luxor, not just in history books or hieroglyphs, but in stone. Immense, towering statues that watch over the ruins like timeless guardians. The most iconic of them sit at the entrance to the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple on the west bank of the Nile. You walk up to one of these statues, and your head tilts slowly upward. 30 feet tall, 40, 50. Ramesses sits calmly, carved from a single block of granite. His expression serene, almost godlike. His hands rest on his knees, his headdress worn like a crown of permanence. But then look closer. This isn't just art. It's not merely a tribute. It's a statement. A message from a man who saw himself as more than a king. Ramesses believed himself divine, and the ancient Egyptians didn't just obey him. They built his image into the land itself. These statues weren't for decoration. They were monuments of power, immortal declarations in stone. And yet, as powerful as they are, many of them have fallen. One of the largest statues of Ramesses II once stood over 57 feet tall. Today it lies shattered, the head separated from the body, the torso cracked. But even lying down, the statue overwhelms. You could spend an hour just staring into the calm, eternal face carved into that massive granite. Those eyes still look out, not with emotion, but with permanence, as if the stone itself remembers. How did ancient Egyptians carve and transport such colossal figures? The granite came from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers to the south. Imagine that. These weren't local stones. These were transported along the Nile, massive solid blocks weighing hundreds of tons. Experts say they floated them on barges, but how? How do you balance a 1,000-ton stone on a wooden boat? How do you move it without cracking it, without breaking the riverbank, without even modern machinery? It's still debated, and once it arrived in Luxor, it had to be moved into place. Upright, aligned, balanced, without cranes, without digital measurements, just manpower, genius, and perhaps something more. Some archaeologists believe the builders used ramps. Others suggest a system of levers and counterweights. And then there are those who wonder if we're missing something, some forgotten technology or knowledge we've yet to rediscover. 'Cause there's something strange about the precision too. These statues aren't crude. They're not just big, they're beautiful. Every feature is symmetric. The ears, the eyes, the folds of cloth, the contours of the body, all in perfect balance, from toe to crown. At this scale, even the smallest mistake would ruin the proportions. But the sculptors didn't make those mistakes. They carved with purpose, and with knowledge we don't fully understand. Some say these weren't just monuments, they were part of a larger energetic system, that the temples, obelisks, and statues were aligned in such a way to channel spiritual, or even cosmic forces. While that might sound far-fetched, it's true that many of these structures are aligned astronomically. Certain angles match solstices, star risings, or the path the sun. Coincidence or something more? Ramesses II wasn't just a builder, he was a symbol. He represented stability, power, order. He expanded Egypt's borders, built cities, and left behind more monuments than any other pharaoh in history. And here in Luxor we see his legacy in stone. But there's a subtle sand wears the surface. Earthquakes have toppled the proud. Floods have loosened stone foundations, and yet they're still here. Some standing, some broken, but all bearing witness. And what of the workers? The sculptors, the engineers, the laborers who carved, moved, and assembled these giants. Their names are lost. Their face is unknown. Yet they stood beneath these same statues thousands of years ago, looking up just like we do. They would have wiped sweat from their brows. They would have felt awe, fatigue, maybe even fear. And now they, too, are part of the silence that surrounds these stone forms. You can still walk among the statues at Luxor today. You can trace your fingers along grooves carved millennia ago. You can stand in the shadow of giants and feel small, but in a good way, as if you've stepped into something timeless, something bigger than any one life. The statues don't speak, they don't move, but somehow they remind us that history is alive, that ambition leaves marks, and that sometimes even stone can carry memory. The sun sinks low over Luxor now. The wind rises slightly, carrying a faint whisper from the Nile. The statues of Ramesses II stand or lie quietly, still gazing into eternity. Their giant forms unmoved by time, but not untouched. And as the desert stars begin to blink awake, you can almost feel it, the presence of the past, pressing in gently. The weight of what was, the mystery of how, and the quiet truth that some giants never really fall. The megalithic observatory of Goseck, Germany. Somewhere in the quiet countryside of central Germany, in a place called Goseck, lies a circular structure that almost no one notices unless they know what they're looking for. From above it looks simple, almost too simple. Just a round wooden fence with 2 gates and an open patch in the middle. But beneath that quiet appearance hides a mystery so ancient, so deliberate, and so aligned with the stars that it forces us to ask, who built this, and what exactly were they watching? They call it the Goseck Circle, and while it may not tower over the landscape like Stonehenge or echo with the grandeur of Egypt, what it represents is just as mysterious. The story of this place goes back more than 7,000 years. That's older than the pyramids, older than most writing, even older than some of the myths we think of as timeless. Discovered from the air in the 1990s, the site first appeared as a faint discoloration in the soil, a crop mark, nothing more. But archaeologists knew better. They began digging, carefully, slowly brushing back layers of soil that hadn't been touched in millennia. What they uncovered was something far more precise than expected. A circular ditch, 2 wooden palisades, and 3 carefully placed gates, each aligned to the rising and setting sun on the winter solstice. The people who built this didn't do it by chance. Imagine for a moment standing there 7,000 years ago. The sky would have been so dark at night, filled with stars, unpolluted by any light from towns or cities. The winters would have been cold, the seasons harsh and important. The sun wasn't just warmth, it was survival, and at the darkest time of year, the shortest day, the winter solstice, people may have gathered in the circle, waiting quietly for the moment when the first beam of sunlight passed through the southeastern gate. And that precision suggests a lot: planning, observation, generations of people watching the sky, recording patterns, learning. This wasn't a random circle, it was a solar calendar, possibly one of the first, and that changes how we see them. Not as simple farmers in animal skins, but as sky watchers, as architects, as thinkers. But here's the part that keeps people awake at night, even thousands of years later. Why? Why would a Neolithic community go to so much trouble to mark the sun's path? Was it just about agriculture? Was it spiritual, ceremonial, or was it something deeper, something we've forgotten how to understand? Some believe the circle was a sacred space, a place of ritual, perhaps a kind of temple without walls. Others think it may have served as a burial site, or a place to mark the changing of the year with festivals or offerings. There's even evidence of fire pits and post holes, which suggests that this place wasn't just observed, it was used over and over. And then there's the strange silence that followed, because for thousands of years after its use, the Gosek circle disappeared from human memory. It was buried, forgotten, covered by soil and grass, hidden under farmland, until a plane flew overhead and noticed the outline. And when that happened, something curious began to emerge. Other circles, similar ones, all across Europe, not just in Germany but in Austria, Hungary, Slovakia. Circles with solar alignments, circles that predate writing, circles that may have been connected not physically but culturally. Which leads to another question: was there a network, a common knowledge shared across ancient communities, long before the civilizations we usually talk about? We often assume that advanced thinking started in Sumer or Egypt or Greece, but the Gosek circle and others like it tell us that something was happening long before that. People were watching the sky, marking time, building in wood and earth with astronomical accuracy. And yet, we know so little about them. There are no names, no myths passed down, no stories carved in stone, just patterns in the ground and gates that catch the sun. One of the most chilling things about Gosek is how it forces us to rethink silence. We tend to believe that if something is important, it leaves traces. Books, temples, statues. But Gosek leaves only geometry and shadow. That may be all the ancient builders intended. Something not meant to last as a monument, but as a moment. The winter solstice sun, the rebirth of light. A shared experience passed from one generation to another, not with words but with sunlight. Some researchers believe the circle may even have had social or political meaning. To control knowledge of the heavens is in a way to hold power. Those who could predict the solstice might have been seen as wise or sacred. Could Gosek have been part of an ancient priesthood? A school of sky priests, scattered across ancient Europe? Or were they simply farmers, deeply in tune with nature, passing down knowledge in the only way they could? The wooden posts are long gone now. What stands in Gosek today is a reconstruction built from archaeological data. The circle has been restored with tall wooden stakes and a quiet path leading in. It's open to the public, but it doesn't draw crowds. There are no massive signs, no throngs of tourists. Just a quiet field and a sense of something watching. Visitors say that standing inside the circle is strangely emotional. You don't feel you can look up and see the same sky, stand in the same spot where someone 7,000 years ago stood and waited for the sun. That feeling, that stillness, is perhaps the real mystery. The Gosek circle doesn't try to dazzle, it doesn't dominate the land. It whispers, it nudges, it leaves questions instead of answers. And in doing so, it reminds us that history isn't always loud. That some of the most advanced thinking may have happened in places we forget to look. Not in palaces, not in pyramids, but in circles made of wood, watching the sky and marking the turning of the year. As you drift off, think of this. Somewhere in Germany, the sun still rises through that ancient gate, just as it did 7,000 years ago. And someone, perhaps not so different from you, once stood there, wrapped in animal furs, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for light. The giant of Guanyu, China. In the quiet heart of Jingzhou, a city nestled alongside the Yangtze River. Something rises above the ancient rooftops. It doesn't just tower. It looms. Bronze muscles bulge under the soft sunlight. The folds of his robe ripple in the wind like real fabric. A long regal beard flows from a stern face that doesn't just watch the city. It seems to guard it. This is the giant of Guanyu. At over 58 meters tall, it's one of the largest statues of a historical figure ever built. But unlike the more famous Buddhas of Asia, or the abstract colossi of the ancient world, this giant is unmistakably human. A warrior, a symbol, a man-made legend, and now legend-made stone. But the question isn't just how it was built, it's why, and what it means. To understand this statue, we have to go back nearly 2,000 years. Back to the age of three kingdoms, a time of betrayal, war, and fading empires. In that chaos lived a man named Guanyu. He wasn't born a legend. He was a general, loyal, disciplined, and fiercely brave. He fought under Liu Bei, the warlord who dreamed of restoring the Han dynasty. Together, they fought battles that shaped Chinese history. But Guanyu wasn't just a warrior. He followed a strict moral code. Honor, loyalty, righteousness. These weren't just words to him, they were law. And that's what made him different. After his death, stories began to spread. People said he never backed down, that his spirit continued to protect, that he had become more than a man, something eternal. Eventually, emperors would posthumously name him the god of war, not for conquest or violence, but for virtue and strength. The kind of strength that refuses to fast forward to the 21st century. And the city of Jingzhou decides to honor him in the most visible way possible. Not with a plaque, not with a temple, but with a statue. And not just any statue. His armor is detailed with over 4,000 bronze strips. In one hand, he holds the green dragon crescent blade, a weapon said to be so powerful, so sharp, that it could cleave through armored soldiers like paper. In the other, his stance is calm but commanding, like a general watching the horizon. But here's where it gets even stranger. This statue wasn't built in some ancient dynasty. It was completed in 2016. Yet when you stand beneath it, it doesn't feel modern. It feels like something older, almost too grand for this era, like it belongs in a forgotten epic. Some say the scale was a mistake, that it's too big, too imposing, that the weight alone caused structural issues with the building beneath it. And sure enough, in 2021, authorities announced it would be dismantled and relocated. Its foundation wasn't strong enough for such a massive presence. But others believe the statue was never meant to last forever. Like the man it represents, the giant of Guanyu stands in defiance of time, but not untouched by it. He has become part of a conversation that stretches centuries long. How do we remember our heroes? In metal? In stone? Or in stories? Beneath the surface, this statue speaks to something deeply human. The desire to preserve virtue. The need to pass on symbols of courage and loyalty. The urge to build something bigger than ourselves. Not just physically, but spiritually. And that's why this megalith isn't just a statue. It's a mirror. It reflects the values of a people, the weight of a culture, and the incredible ambition to shape memory into matter. The kind of ambition ancient civilizations knew well, when they carved mountain temples and buried kings with armies of stone, when they moved massive blocks with unknown tools, when they lifted the past into the present. And here, in a modern Chinese city, that same spirit lives on. As you watch the sun slip behind the figure's towering head, casting a long shadow across the city, you can't help but wonder, what will future generations think of this giant? Will they see it as a marvel of modern engineering? A cultural statement? A misplaced dream? Or will they simply say, here stood something great? And maybe that's enough. The giant of Guan Yu doesn't need to last 1,000 years to leave an impact. Because in this moment, under the quiet hush of evening, with the city lights blinking on like distant stars, it already feels like it has. The giant of Zeus at Olympia. There are statues that impress. There are statues that inspire. And then, there are statues that leave people speechless for generations long after the stone has crumbled and the gold has vanished. The statue of Zeus at Olympia was one of those. When you think of ancient Greece, your mind might jump to marble temples, olive trees swaying in warm Mediterranean air, or philosophers pondering life under the sun. But deep within that world, hidden in the sacred sanctuary of Olympia, once stood a monument so massive, so striking, that even seasoned travelers stopped in silent awe. This wasn't just a sculpture. It was a vision, presence, and to those who saw it, it felt alive. We know its name. We know where it stood. But today, the statue is gone. No pieces remain, no fragments of gold, just a ghost of its former glory. And the quiet questions that... So let's step back, way back to the 5th century BCE. Olympia wasn't just any city. It was a sacred site, nestled among low hills and green groves in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. This was the heart of the Olympic Games, the original ones. Athletes from across Greece would gather here, competing not for fame or fortune, but for honor, for Zeus. And inside this sacred complex, a temple was built in his name, a massive stone temple. But even its towering columns couldn't prepare visitors for what was inside. Because when they entered the cella, the inner chamber, they didn't just see a statue, they saw Zeus, seated on a grand throne, calm, enormous, watching. He wasn't standing, he didn't need to. Even seated, the statue stretched over 40 feet high, so tall his head nearly brushed the temple ceiling. Just think about that. A statue so large, the very building struggled to contain it. Made of ivory and gold, his skin shone pale like bone, but his robes and ornaments glowed with warm, hammered gold. His eyes were inlaid with colored glass or gemstones. No one agrees for sure, but witnesses say they had a lifelike gleam. His throne, too, was a masterpiece, inlaid with ebony, ivory, and more precious stones than anyone could count. Mythical creatures and ancient stories carved into every armrest, every leg. In one hand he held Nike, the winged goddess of victory, delicate and small in comparison. In the other, a scepter, crowned with an eagle. King of gods, king of sky. But despite his power, his posture was calm, serene. As if to say, you may compete, you may sweat and struggle, but in the end I decide. It was the sculptor Phidias who built him, one of the most famous artists in ancient Greece. He had already sculpted Athena Parthenos for the Parthenon in Athens, but with Zeus, he created something beyond human. They say the moment he completed the statue, lightning struck nearby. Was it coincidence? Was it a sign? For the people of the time, it meant one thing. Zeus had approved. For nearly 800 years, this statue dominated the ancient imagination. Roman emperors visited it. Philosophers described it. Travelers came from across the Mediterranean just to see it with their own eyes. Some wept. Others felt fear. A few felt a peace they couldn't explain. And yet it vanished. Not in war, not in fire, but in silence. Sometime around the 4th or 5th century CE, long after Christianity became the dominant force in the Roman Empire, pagan sanctuaries like Olympia fell out of use. The statue was likely moved to Constantinople, some say. Others think it remained until an earthquake or fire destroyed it. But no one knows for sure. There are no remains, no pieces, only copies and ancient descriptions. Even the temple that held it lies in ruins now. Columns collapsed, stones scattered like broken teeth in the grass. But the memory of the statue lived on, and unlike many wonders like the Hanging Gardens or the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the statue of Zeus was never truly questioned. Everyone agreed it existed, it was real. It changed the lives of those who saw it. And yet, it's strange, isn't it, that something so large, so celebrated, could simply fade into history. Quietly, almost respectfully, as if Zeus himself decided to withdraw, leaving only stories behind. Today, if you go to Olympia, you'll walk among ancient foundations and feel the soft hum of the past in the air. There's a hush to the place, a gentle quiet, and though the statue is gone, many say they still feel watched, not in a threatening way, more like observed, as if the old gods still linger somewhere, peering through time. And maybe that's the most powerful part, because the statue of Zeus wasn't just a wonder of stone and gold, it was a wonder of presence. And even now, without a single piece left standing, that presence hasn't gone away. Simply waits. The megalithic ruins of Chaco Canyon. In the wide-open desert of northwestern New Mexico, far from the busy highways and distant from the light of cities, lies a place where time feels paused. Here, tucked within a remote canyon surrounded by mesas and sandstone cliffs, are the remains of an ancient world, massive, precise, mysterious. This is Chaco Canyon. At first glance, the land looks quiet, just rock, scrub brush, and sky. But as you walk deeper into the canyon, the silence becomes something else. A kind of presence. Stones stacked into walls taller than a house. Long, low structures that once housed ceremonies and gatherings. Roads that stretch in straight lines for miles, some leading nowhere, ending in cliffs or fading into desert. You begin to realize this isn't just an archaeological site. It was once a center of life, a sacred place, a city of stone built by a people whose knowledge still confounds historians. The ancestral Puebloans, sometimes called the Chacoans, built their monumental civilization here between 850 and 1250 AD. But the sheer scale of what they achieved doesn't make sense, not at first. They had no metal tools, no pack animals, no wheels. And yet, they built multi-story buildings with hundreds of rooms. The largest of them, Pueblo Bonito, stood 5 stories high and covered over 2 acres. Its walls were carefully constructed, each stone shaped and placed by hand. Inside were rooms filled with turquoise, pottery, and rare shells from the Pacific and the Gulf of Mexico. Trade stretched for thousands of miles. But Chaco wasn't just about buildings, it was about alignment, intention. The entire canyon appears to be mapped to the sky. Buildings line up with the solstices and equinoxes. Some walls are set so that at specific times of the year, sunlight will beam directly through narrow openings. The great kivas, circular ceremonial structures sunken into the earth, are aligned to lunar cycles, some of which repeat only every 18.6 years. The people who built this didn't just live with the sky. They studied it. They worshipped with it. They embedded it into their architecture. One of the most mysterious alignments is found in a remote corner of the canyon. There, on the cliff face, 3 sandstone slabs are positioned in just such a way that they cast shifting shadows over a spiral petroglyph carved into the rock. On the summer solstice, a single shaft of light, known as the sun dagger, pierces the center of the spiral. On the winter solstice, 2 shafts frame it. It's like a prehistoric clock, a solar calendar carved into stone. But this calendar, this symbol of celestial awareness, wasn't placed randomly. It reflects a culture deeply tuned to the rhythms of the universe. And yet the biggest mystery remains: why here? Chaco Canyon is not an easy place to live. The climate is harsh. Rainfall is scarce. The land can barely support agriculture. So why build something so complex in such an unforgiving place? Some believe Chaco wasn't meant to be lived in year-round. Instead, it may have been a spiritual center. a place people journeyed to during certain times of the year to celebrate, observe the skies, and take part in shared rituals. Evidence supports this idea. Roads from Chaco stretch across the desert like spokes of a wheel. Some go out more than 100 miles in a straight line. They connect to distant outposts, smaller great houses, built in the same style, as if part of a vast network. The roads are wide, some as much as 30 feet across, and they're straight, impossibly straight. They go over hills instead of around them. Some lead to places with no known settlement, only markers, like shrines or cairns. What kind of culture invests so much effort into roads that serve no practical purpose? Unless those roads were not just for trade or travel but pilgrimage. As the sun sets in Chaco Canyon, the shadows stretch across the ruins. The walls glow golden. The silence deepens. It's easy to imagine figures walking those roads, guided by starlight, heading towards something sacred. But even now, after decades of excavation and study, Chaco keeps its secrets. We don't know what language the Chacoans spoke. We have no written records. We only have the stone, and in the stone, patterns, geometry, harmony, hidden knowledge. Some researchers believe the Chacoans possessed a kind of mathematical understanding far ahead of their time. The great houses are often aligned to the cardinal directions. Their measurements are consistent, their layouts planned. Some buildings seem to reflect the golden ratio. Others mirror lunar and solar cycles with eerie precision. It's as if science, spirituality, and architecture were one in the same. Archaeologists have found hundreds of rooms sealed off for unknown reasons. Some contain elaborate offerings. Others are empty, their purpose unclear. And then there are the bones. Burials found beneath Pueblo Bonito show something unexpected. Some individuals were buried with extraordinary wealth. Turquoise jewelry, macaw feathers, and sacred pottery, while others were not. These elite burials suggest a hierarchy. But the mystery deepens. DNA analysis revealed that many of these high-status individuals came from the same maternal line, passed down over centuries. Could this mean Chaco had dynasties, ruling families, a matrilineal elite class? And if so, how did such a structure hold in a world without written laws, without armies, without the centralized power we usually associate with ancient cities? The reasons remain uncertain. Climate change, drought, social upheaval. Some suggest the ceremonial system broke down, others think the people simply moved on. What's known is that the descendants of the Chacoans didn't disappear. Their traditions live on in the Hopi, Zuni, and other Puebloan peoples of the Southwest, who still carry stories of migration, stars, and sacred places. To them, Chaco isn't a ruin, it's still alive. Protected now as a World Heritage Site, Chaco Canyon draws visitors from around the world. Scientists study its architecture. Astronomers explore its alignments. Spiritual seekers walk its paths in silence. And yet, no one really knows what it was like to stand inside a full Great Kiva on a solstice night, to hear chants rise beneath a sky so vast and clear it feels like the stars are touching Earth. We can only imagine, and sometimes that's enough. Because Chaco Canyon, like all great mysteries, isn't just a place, it's a question carved in stone. A message from a civilization that understood something we've forgotten, that the sky was not above us, it was within us. And every wall, every road, every chamber of that desert city was a reflection of the universe itself. The giant of San Agustin, silent watchers of Colombia. In the remote hills of southern Colombia, where mist rolls over ancient forests and the air feels older than memory, a strange land of stone giants waits in silence. San Agustin, a name that echoes through archaeological circles, whispered among those chasing the world's most mysterious ruins. It's not a city, not exactly a temple either. It's a sanctuary, maybe even a tomb, Or perhaps something we still can't understand. What we do know is this. San Agustin is home to some of the most enigmatic megalithic statues ever discovered in the Americas. Over 500 massive stone figures, each carved by hand, each unique. Some look human, others resemble animals. And then there are those that look like something else entirely. Imagine walking through a forest and suddenly seeing a 12-foot stone figure staring back at you. Its eyes wide, hollow, and unreadable. Its hands clasped as if guarding a secret. All around it, more statues. Some smiling, some grimacing, some holding tools, others holding what appear to be severed heads. They aren't just sculptures, they're guardians. They sit over tombs, massive underground burial chambers, with lids that weigh several tons. Whoever these people were, they had a deep obsession with the afterlife. But here's where things get strange. We don't know who made them. We don't know their language. We don't know their rituals. And despite all the research, no written record exists. Archaeologists have tried to piece it together. They've dug through layers of history, pottery, jewelry, bones. They estimate the culture existed between 1000 BCE and 900 CE. But the statues might be even older. Spiral patterns, stylized jaguars, birdmen, figures with two faces. One smiles, one screams. Were they gods? Shamans? Aliens? Giants? And then, there are the measurements. Some of the stone figures weigh up to 30 tons. The rock used? Not local. It had to be hauled across rivers and valleys. With what tools? We still don't know. There's no sign of metal chisels. No evidence of wheels. Just raw strength and something else. Something we can't quite name. One statue, known as El Diablo, features two figures fused back to back. It's uncanny. It's like someone tried to carve duality itself. Day and night. Life and death. Man and spirit. Another statue has wings. One more resembles a reptilian creature with large claws. None of these match anything we've found elsewhere in pre-Columbian America. And here's the part that keeps even the most skeptical historians awake at night. Why were these statues buried? Yes, many were found underground, deliberately buried by the same people who carved them, as if they didn't want future generations to find them. Or maybe they feared something. Maybe these statues weren't protectors, but prisoners. There are theories, of course. One suggests San Agustin was a pilgrimage site, where spiritual leaders from across the region came to perform rituals, maybe even make offerings to gods no longer remembered. Another theory sees it as a sacred cemetery for an elite class of priest-kings. A third theory, it proposes that the site was aligned with celestial patterns, that the statues were positioned according to the stars. But alignments can be tricky, and time can distort meaning. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they found the region abandoned. The people who carved the giants had vanished centuries earlier. No war, no natural disaster, they just disappeared. And their statues stayed behind, staring, waiting. Even now, you can walk among them. The air is still, the jungle, thick. Sometimes the moss covers their eyes. Other times, a sudden breeze feels like a whisper. Visitors have reported odd sensations. A sense of being watched. Dreams after visiting the site. Some say the statues change when you're not looking. Just slightly, a head turns, an expression shifts. A trick of the light, or something older trying to remember itself. Some have noticed patterns among the graves. Certain stones line up perfectly on solstice days. Others point towards sacred rivers, as if marking a path, not just in life but after death. A map, perhaps. One carving shows a figure holding a bowl, and inside it, a spiral. Over and over, the spiral returns. A message left behind by a civilization that could move mountains, but didn't leave behind a single word. And as you listen to this, you might start to imagine yourself there. standing before one of those giants, feeling its cold, weather-worn surface, staring into eyes that haven't blinked in thousands of years. You feel small, not just physically, but cosmically, like you've stepped into someone else's dream, a dream that never ended. San Agustin is more than a ruin. It's a question carved in stone, a puzzle without a key, a place where the line between myth and memory disappears into the mist. Whatever they believed, whoever they were, one thing is clear. They wanted to be remembered. And now, as the world sleeps, and you drift deeper into rest, the stone giants of Colombia continue to stand guard, watching over the land, silent and eternal, waiting for the moment when we finally remember what they were trying to say. The megalithic temples of Tarquinia. In the soft rolling hills of central Italy, not far from where the Mediterranean breeze reaches the land, lies a place most travelers pass without ever knowing what sleeps beneath their feet. The modern town is called Tarquinia, but long before this name, long before the Roman Empire, there was a culture here, powerful, mysterious, and deeply spiritual, and they left behind temples of the dead. But these were not cold crypts, not forgotten ruins. They were homes carved from the earth, painted with color, filled with music and myth, and as the centuries passed, they were buried, not just by dirt and stone, but by time itself. Today, archaeologists call it the Monterossi Necropolis, a burial ground with over 6,000 tombs, many of them dug straight into soft volcanic rock. But some of them, maybe 200, hide something rare. Inside their chambers, protected from wind and light, are murals, frescoes, stories, still alive after more than 2,500 years. Let's walk slowly through it now. You're not alone. The wind is soft, and the sun is warm on your back. You step down a narrow stone corridor, carved carefully into the slope. The deeper you go, the cooler the air becomes. A door appears, not made of wood or metal, but of rock. And beyond it, another world. You enter a room no larger than a modern bedroom, but its walls are covered, every inch. Dancers, athletes, banquets, musicians playing flutes and lyres, men reclining on couches, women seated beside them as equals. No fear, no pain, just motion. Celebration. This is the world of the Etruscans, a civilization older than Rome, more mysterious than Greece. Their language, still not fully understood. Their origin, debated. But here in Tarquinia, their vision is preserved. Not in art. In the tomb of the leopards, two spotted felines perch above a vibrant feast. They're not hunting, they're watching. Below them, a joyful banquet unfolds. Figures raise cups and toasts. Food is passed. Songs are played. You can almost hear the music. You can almost feel the warmth of that long-forgotten gathering. And that's what makes Tarquinia so haunting. These tombs don't mourn the dead. They celebrate life. They suggest that the Etruscans saw death, not as an end, but a transition, a passing into another kind of home. Some tombs have ceilings, others feature shields and helmets, others simple flowers. In the tomb of the hunting and fishing, a man casts a net into the sea, another leaps from a rock into water. Birds fly overhead. It's tranquil, peaceful. You get the sense that the Etruscans believed, whatever lies beyond this life, it's not a place of darkness, it's a place of freedom. But how did they build this? Why so many, and why here? Tarquinia was one of the great Etruscan city-states, powerful in trade and culture. But these tombs suggest something more. A society obsessed with memory. They didn't just bury their dead. They prepared them, dressed them, surrounded them with symbols, animals, gods and guides. They didn't want their ancestors forgotten. They wanted them to be comfortable. Every tomb was different. Some were grand, others simple. Some featured mythological scenes, others everyday life. In one, dancers sway in loose rhythm. In another, A dark-skinned figure guards the door, possibly Che-Run, the Etruscan spirit of death, not a monster but a guide. It's important to remember, all of this predates Rome. When the Romans came, they absorbed what they could, but they also erased much. The Etruscans eventually vanished from history, folded into the Roman story. Their language was lost, their customs buried. Only these tombs remain as whispers of who they were, what they believed, how they loved, how they passed from one world into the next. Some say these tombs are the closest we'll ever get to seeing how pre-Roman Italy truly lived. Others believe there's still more to find. Tombs still sealed, buried beneath layers of earth and olive roots. But even among the tombs we've opened, new mysteries rise. Why do some tombs feature style art while others are uniquely Etruscan? Were they copying, collaborating, or did they share ideas across seas? And why so much emphasis on equality between men and women? Unlike other ancient cultures, Etruscan art often shows women sitting beside men, reclining at feasts, named in inscriptions. It's not just progressive, it's puzzling. And it makes the loss of their language even more frustrating. So many questions remain unanswered. The names of gods, the meanings of gestures, the reasons behind certain rituals, all locked in a script we can only partly read. But the paintings, they speak for themselves. They don't need translation. They show joy, movement, memory, and perhaps that's enough. As you slowly walk back up the narrow passage, leaving the painted chamber behind, the air grows warmer, the light grows brighter, the sounds of the modern world return, but something lingers. You carry the image of dancers frozen in motion, of a banquet that never ends, of a people who didn't fear death, because they prepared for it like a homecoming. Tarquinia isn't just a site, it's a reminder that long before Rome and empire, long before cathedrals and calendars, there was a culture here that saw beauty in the unknown, that honored its dead with art, laughter, and color. And even now, centuries later, those memories are waiting for us. Patiently, in the quiet, beneath the earth, still watching, still remembering. The megalithic tombs of Lac Marais occur. Hidden along the quiet coastline of Brittany in northwestern France, lies a cluster of stones so massive, so impossibly old, that they seem to belong to another. At first glance it might look like a serene field, dotted with weathered stones and crumbled remains. But once you begin to trace their shape, once you understand their scale, their positioning, and their impossible weight, you start to realize this wasn't some accidental scattering. It was deliberate. It was built. And it was built thousands of years before the Roman Empire even existed. One of the stones at Lac Marais occur, known as the Grand Menhir Brise, or the Great Broken Standing Stone, once stood at over 20 meters high. That's taller than a 6-story building. And it wasn't carved from some nearby rock. It was quarried, shaped, and somehow transported from many kilometers away, long before the invention of the wheel, the pulley, or even metal tools. Now shattered into 4 enormous pieces, it lies broken across the earth, as if something colossal once knocked it down. What kind of people could have built something so massive, and why? Archaeologists estimate that the Grand Menhir was erected around 4500 BCE, making it over 6,500 years old. That places it among the oldest man-made monuments on Earth. Older than Stonehenge, older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. And it wasn't alone. The Grand Menhir was once part of a wider ceremonial complex that included passage graves, tumuli, dolmens, and other megalithic structures, all arranged with baffling precision. Just meters away stands the Table des Marchands, the merchant's table, a stone burial chamber formed with towering upright slabs and a massive stone roof. Step inside, and you'll see carvings etched along the inner walls. Strange horned creatures, axes, sun-like symbols. No one knows exactly what they represent. Were they gods? Ritual tools? Something entirely different. Even more curious is the alignment of the stones. Some researchers believe the builders of Lochmarker had a deep understanding of astronomy. The Grand Menhir and the Table des Marchands, when standing, might have been aligned with the Moon's complex 18.6-year cycle, something modern scientists only confirmed with advanced measurements. Yet somehow, this ancient culture may have known it already, building entire stone complexes to mark its phases. But who were these people? We call them the Neolithic builders, farmers, and early settlers, who lived in wooden homes, hunted with flint tools, and wore woven garments. But if they truly were so primitive, how did they move a 300-ton slab of granite across open terrain, then raise it vertically into the sky without cranes or metal supports? Just for comparison, the heaviest stone in Egypt's Great Pyramid weighs about 80 tons. The Grand Menhir was nearly 4 times that size. And it gets stranger. The Grand Menhir is made of a single solid piece of granite, but the region itself doesn't have granite. It was transported, somehow, from over 10 kilometers away. There are no traces of sleds or scaffolding, no roads, no marks in the terrain showing how such a thing could have been done. Some theories suggest they used teams of hundreds, maybe thousands of people dragging the stone with ropes, logs, and sheer muscle. Others argue that they had forgotten techniques we no longer understand, methods that may have involved sound resonance, wet clay lubrication, or advanced geometry. These aren't fringe theories. Even respected archaeologists admit we don't know how it was done. As the centuries passed, many of these structures fell. Some believe it was an earthquake. Others think it may have been deliberately destroyed, perhaps during a shift in religious belief or societal collapse. Whatever the reason, its fall marked the end of a mysterious chapter in Europe's prehistory. Even in its broken state, the stone is a marvel. Standing beside its shattered pieces, it's hard not to feel small. It's hard not to wonder what message the builders hoped to send across time. Was it a monument to their dead? A calendar for their crops? A beacon to someone beyond? Today, the site remains eerily quiet. Birds fly overhead. Wild grass sways around the base of the stones. Tourists walk carefully along the marked paths, often silent, as if speaking too loudly would disturb something sacred. And maybe that feeling is correct. Because standing among these megaliths, you realize you're not just looking at history. You're standing inside a puzzle older than writing, older than kings, older than myth. The stones of Lochmarker do not shout their secrets. They whisper them like wind across a field. Fragments of knowledge lost in time, etched into granite, meant for those who would one day return to listen. And so we stand. Quiet, listening, wondering who they were, how they built, and why they left behind these sleeping giants of stone. The giant of Borobudur Buddha statues, Indonesia. It stands in the heart of Java, quiet, ancient, and still. A monument so massive and intricately built, its very presence makes you feel small, not just in size but in time. This is Borobudur, a temple unlike any other, carved from volcanic stone, rising from the green hills like a sacred mountain. The giant of Borobudur is more than a structure. It is a story written in stone. And somehow, even though it has stood here for over 1,000 years, it feels as though we're only just beginning to understand it. Imagine walking up a silent hill before dawn. The mist clings to your skin. The jungle hums with life. And out of the shadows, a massive silhouette emerges. Terraces, statues, stupas, layer upon layer of spiritual design. Each step upward is not just physical, it's symbolic. It's like walking through a carved-out version of the cosmos itself. Borobudur wasn't built in a day, or even in a single generation. No one knows exactly when construction began. Some say the 8th century, others place it a little later. But we do know that it was built during the Salandra dynasty, when Mahayana Buddhism spread across Southeast Asia and the rulers of Java wanted to carve their beliefs into stone. What they created is staggering. Over 500 Buddha statues, more than 2,600 intricate relief panels, a series of 9 stacked platforms that rise like steps toward enlightenment. And at the very top, a great central stupa, massive and hollow, like a crown. From above, the whole monument forms a mandala, a spiritual diagram of the universe. But what's strange is, Borobudur wasn't just a temple. It wasn't a place for crowds, festivals, or offerings. It was designed for movement, for quiet, meditative walking. As you ascend, you're meant to follow the reliefs, to watch stories unfold on the walls. Stories of Buddha's life, of morality, of temptation, of awakening. It's as if and the deeper you go, the more it reveals. The lowest levels show our earthly desires. The carvings here are full of life, battles, markets, music, and passion. But as you climb higher, the carvings shift. They become simpler. The noise of the world fades. By the time you reach the top, the reliefs vanish altogether. All that's left is silence, space, open sky. Some believe that's the whole point, that Borobudur wasn't just a place to learn about enlightenment. It was a physical journey toward it. A path you walk with your body and feel with your soul. But here's where things get even stranger. No one knows why it was abandoned. By the 14th century, Borobudur was gone, swallowed by jungle, forgotten by history. For centuries, no one spoke of it. It wasn't until 1814, when an Englishman named Thomas Stamford Raffles heard local stories of a lost mountain and began digging. What he uncovered stunned the world. It took decades to excavate the full structure. Trees had rooted deep into the stones. Earthquakes had cracked the terraces, and volcanoes had dumped ash over everything. But still, underneath it all, Borobudur survived. That resilience is part of its mystery. Despite centuries of silence, it remained nearly intact, as if time had touched everything around it, but left the monument itself alone. Some call it luck. Others say it was built with ancient techniques we no longer understand. How did they cut and transport over 2 million stone blocks? How did they align the structure so perfectly with the cardinal directions? Why did they leave no written records about its construction? Even the very design is curious. Borobudur has no inner chambers, no altars inside. Everything is external, open to the sky, as if the divine wasn't hidden within, but found in the experience itself. As if enlightenment was never meant to be found in seclusion, but in rising above. Among the many statues that populate the terraces, some are headless. Some are missing arms or hands. Many show mudras, sacred gestures. And though each one was carved individually, together they seem to pulse with one quiet rhythm. The giant of Borobudur isn't one single statue. It's the entire monument. The whole temple is the Buddha. Its base represents the world of desire. The middle terraces represent the world of form. And the top, formlessness, nirvana. It's not a temple with a Buddha inside. It is the Buddha. And yet, we don't know who the architects were. Their names are lost, their designs never recorded. It's as if the builders were more focused on the journey than the recognition. As modern scholars try to piece together the puzzle of Borobudur, some have noticed strange alignments. The temple is perfectly positioned along ancient trade routes. It mirrors sacred mountains in the distance, and some believe it was meant to resonate with celestial events, the solstices, the movement of Venus, the cycles of time. Was Borobudur a temple, a calendar, a map of consciousness, or something else entirely? Some say there are chambers below it. Others suggest hidden tunnels. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed anomalies beneath the base. The temple is sacred, and no one wants to risk damaging it. Still, the questions linger. Why did the Salandra kings build it here in this remote part of Java? What knowledge did they possess about the stars, the earth, the soul? And most of all, why did it fade from memory so easily? Today, Borobudur stands again, not forgotten, not buried, but quiet. At sunrise, visitors walk its stone paths in silence. They move from level to level just as the ancient monks once did. And somewhere along the way, between the shadows and the carvings, they feel something, a presence, a pulse, as if the stones remember, as if the giant of Borobudur is still breathing, still guiding those who climb its steps in search of something greater. Not just history, but awakening. Mount Nemrut, thrones of the forgotten gods. High in the mountains of southeastern Turkey, more than 7,000 feet above sea level, sits a place that feels like it shouldn't exist. The wind is dry, the landscape is rocky, barren, silent. And then suddenly there they are. Scattered across the mountain's summit, massive stone heads stare out into the emptiness, detached from the bodies they once belonged to. Bodies that now sit lower on the slopes, still seated on stone thrones. These are the gods of Mount Nemrut. But who put them here? And more importantly, why? It begins with a name, Antiochus I, a king from the ancient kingdom of Commagene, a place that doesn't exist anymore, a kingdom that lived in the shadows between two empires, Rome to the west, Persia to the east. He ruled around the 1st century BCE, and he believed he was more than a man. He believed he was divine. So he did something that no one expected. He built a mountain of gods. At the peak of Mount Nemrut, he ordered a tomb sanctuary to be constructed. A grand, otherworldly place where humans and gods would sit side by side. Not temples, not altars, but a carefully constructed artificial peak, made from crushed stone and gravel, rising 50 meters high, designed to cover what he claimed would be his burial chamber. But no one has ever found the tomb. Still sealed, still silent. Around it 2 terraces were built, one to the east, one to the west, each one lined with giant statues, some standing, some collapsed, some shattered by time or earthquakes. These aren't just any gods. They're a mix. You see Apollo, but also Mithras, Zeus, and Ahura Mazda, Heracles, and Persian-style guardians. It's as if east and west were stitched together, as if the gods of 2 worlds were forced to sit in a shared kingdom. In the middle of them all, seated just as tall, is Antiochus himself, a king among gods, or maybe pretending to be one. But over the years the mountain has changed. Time broke the heads off the bodies. Now the heads sit on the ground, huge, eerie, serene. They look out over, carved with expression, with detail. They're weathered, but still powerful. And at dawn, when the first light hits them, it feels like they've just woken up from some long, ancient sleep. But the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. This was not a site built for public worship. It's not near any major city or settlement. There's no easy access, no roads in that time. Getting there would have been difficult, and yet massive statues were hauled up the mountain, carved, placed, aligned. Why? For glory? For a tomb? Or something else? No one has ever found Antiochus's actual burial site. The stone mound at the peak is so densely packed with crushed rock that it's impossible to excavate without destroying the structure. Even modern equipment can't easily scan what lies inside. Some researchers believe there's nothing there at all, that it was symbolic. Others are convinced there's a hidden chamber, maybe an entrance tunneled through the side, sealed and forgotten. And then there's the alignment. The entire layout of the statues and terraces follows solar patterns. The eastern terrace catches the sunrise, the western terrace is for the sunset. Some think it was meant for rituals, sunrise offerings, sunset ceremonies. But no texts survive to explain the meaning. The inscriptions that do remain are cryptic. They speak of Antiochus's divine lineage, his pride in being descended from both the Macedonian kings and Persian dynasties. He believed he was born of two great worlds destined to unite them through faith and power. But then his kingdom disappeared, conquered, absorbed, forgotten. And what's left is this mountain, a place where gods sit without worshippers, a king sits without a name, and time seems to stop. The isolation is haunting. There are no nearby cities, no grand roads, no bustling life, just silence, stone, and the feeling that something is watching. Some believe the entire monument wasn't made for glory, but as a message to the future, that the mountain wasn't just a tomb, but a beacon, a way to survive memory loss, to survive the fall of kingdoms. Even the choice of material, small stones instead of solid rock, suggests an understanding of earthquakes. Flexible, shock-absorbing, designed not to collapse. It's engineering hidden inside ritual, knowledge hidden inside myth. Still, the strangest part isn't the size, it's the presence. When you stand there between the heads, there's a quiet that doesn't feel empty. It feels intentional, like you're standing in a place that was meant to be remembered, even when no one remembers why. To this day, no one knows what really lies beneath the mound. No one knows if Antiochus is buried there, or if the whole thing was a monument to an idea that humans and gods were never so different, just separated by time and belief. And now all that's left is the stone, silent, seated, still staring at the horizon, waiting, maybe for someone to return, or for someone to finally understand what they were trying to say. Karahan Tepe, the giant man unearthed. In the dry, ancient lands of southeastern Turkey, the landscape is deceptively quiet. Dust blows across low hills. The ground is a mix of pale stone and silent time. But just over 30 kilometers from the famous site of Göbekli Tepe, another place has begun to whisper its secrets. A place older, stranger, and far less understood. This is Karahan Tepe, and at its center is a figure that no one expected to find. A man, carved in stone, but not just carved, buried. Half submerged into the wall of a chamber, his arms folded, his eyes alert, and his size unnatural. Some call him the Giant Man. Discovered in 2023 during excavations led by Turkish archaeologists. This statue wasn't placed on a pedestal. He wasn't meant to be seen standing tall. He was embedded into the wall itself, staring out into a space that likely hadn't seen light in thousands of years. And immediately the questions began. Who carved this? Why did they place it here? Hidden, secret, sealed? And what kind of people even could carve something this sophisticated over 11,000 years ago? Because that's what the carbon dating suggests. Karahan Tepe, like Göbekli Tepe, may go back to the 10th millennium BCE. That's before writing, before wheels, before metal tools, before what we call civilization. And yet, here is a figure smooth and detailed, human in form, but unnerving in presence. His ribs are visible, his arms stretched down and around a large phallic pillar. His expression is neutral but alert, and he isn't alone. This chamber where he was found is filled with carved pillars, some shaped like humans, others marked with symbols, snakes, animals, abstract designs that no one can yet decode. There is no ceiling, only a ring of stones. And a feeling that the space wasn't just functional, it was sacred, ritualistic, designed with intent. But what that intent was, no one knows, because Karahan Tepe wasn't just one chamber. It's an entire hilltop site, still being excavated. Hundreds of T-shaped stone pillars, some weighing tons, have been unearthed, all carefully arranged. Many older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than most human memory. And yet the carving is precise, the layout is intelligent, and the themes are deeply human. Birth, death, transformation, protection. This wasn't just a village, it was a ceremonial center, maybe even a kind of ancient school or temple, where generations returned to learn or to worship or to remember something long gone. And in the middle of that sacred structure, this man, this stone figure, placed not to dominate but to witness. Some experts believe he represents a deity, others think he was a guardian, placed at the entrance of a ritual chamber. But there's another theory. What if this wasn't symbolic? What if the statue depicts a real figure, someone the builders honored, or feared, or wanted to preserve in memory? Because his size is not normal, he's larger than life, and in cultures all around the world, you'll find echoes of this idea, that before our time, there were giants not just in myth but in flesh, figures who walked with power, who knew things. Just over 30 kilometers from the famous site of Göbekli Tepe, another place has begun to whisper its secrets. A place older, stranger, and far less understood. This is Karahan Tepe, and at its center is a figure that no one expected to find. A man, carved in stone but not just carved, buried. Half submerged into the wall of a chamber, his arms folded, his eyes alert, and his size unnatural. Some call him the Giant Man. Discovered in 2023 during excavations led by Turkish archaeologists. This statue wasn't placed on a pedestal. He wasn't meant to be seen standing tall. He was embedded into the wall itself, staring out into a space that likely hadn't seen light in thousands of years. And immediately the questions began. Who carved this? Why did they place it here? Hidden, secret, sealed? And what kind of people even could carve something this sophisticated over 11,000 years ago? Because that's what the carbon dating suggests. Karahan Tepe, like Göbekli Tepe, may go back to the 10th millennium BCE. That's before writing, before wheels, before metal tools, before what we call civilization. And yet here is a figure smooth and detailed, human in form, but unnerving in presence. His ribs are visible, his arms stretched down and around a large phallic pillar. His expression is neutral but alert, and he isn't alone. This chamber where he was found is filled with carved pillars, some shaped like humans, others marked with symbols, snakes, animals, abstract designs that no one can yet decode. There is no ceiling, only a ring of stones, and a feeling that the space wasn't just functional, it was sacred, ritualistic, designed with intent. But what that intent was, no one knows, because Karahan Tepe wasn't just one chamber. It's an entire hilltop site, still being excavated. Hundreds of T-shaped stone pillars, some weighing tons, have been unearthed, all carefully arranged. Many older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than most human memory. And yet the carving is precise, the layout is intelligent, and the themes are deeply human. Birth, death, transformation, protection. This wasn't just a village, it was a ceremonial center, maybe even a kind of ancient school or temple, where generations returned to learn or to worship or to remember something long gone. And in the middle of that sacred structure, this man, this stone figure, placed not to dominate but to witness. Some experts believe he represents a deity, others think he was a guardian, placed at the entrance of a ritual chamber. But there's another theory. What if this wasn't symbolic? What if the statue depicts a real figure, someone the builders honored, or feared, or wanted to preserve in memory? Because his size is not normal, he's larger than life, and in cultures all around the world, you'll find echoes of this idea, that before our time, there were giants not just in myth but in flesh, figures who walked with power, who knew things we've forgotten, and whose presence had to be carved because words weren't enough. Even the layout of the chamber suggests something purposeful. The body of the statue is built into the rock, not placed after. The chamber was carved around him, as if he was always meant to be there, as if the builders believed his image needed to be part of the stone itself. And that's the most haunting part, because we don't know who they were, the builders, the carvers, the people who designed something so advanced, in a time we still call prehistoric. We don't know what they believed, what language they spoke, or what stories they told at night. We only know this, that thousands of years ago, long before the first kingdoms rose, before the first books were written, before the great temples of Mesopotamia or Egypt, people came to this place, and they built something meant to last. They carved into bedrock, they dragged stones heavier than cars, and they shaped human forms with meaning and care. Then they left or disappeared or buried it all by hand. Because just like Göbekli Tepe, Karhan Tepe was intentionally sealed, covered with earth, preserved. Why? To protect it, to hide it, or to make sure the future wouldn't forget. And now we stand in that future. We look into the face of the giant man, and he looks back, unblinking, unchanged, waiting. He doesn't speak, but he says something all the same, that there were people here long before we imagined, that they were not simple, not primitive, and not forgotten, just quiet until now. The giant of Hampi's Narasimha. The land of Hampi is unlike any other. The ruins stretch endlessly across a dusty sunlit plateau, strewn with boulders that seem almost placed by hand. This ancient city, once the heart of the Vijayanagara Empire, whispers stories through crumbling temples, silent mandapas, and long-forgotten market streets. But among all these remnants, one figure rises taller, mightier, and more mysterious than the rest. A colossal guardian carved in stone, the monolithic statue of Narasimha. This is no ordinary sculpture. Towering at over 6.7 meters, the figure sits cross-legged, with bulging eyes, a roaring mouth, and limbs that pulse with a sense of restrained ferocity. This half-man, half-lion. Narasimha, the fourth avatar of Vishnu, frozen in the act of divine wrath. His expression is intense, even unsettling, yet deeply still. There's a paradox here. Rage carved with grace, aggression held in sacred balance. The statue dates back to 1528 AD, during the reign of Krishna-devaraya, one of the most powerful kings of South India. And yet, when you stand before it, there's a strange feeling that it is much, much older. Weathered by time, scarred by invaders, and partially damaged, it now sits exposed under the open sky, headless from what was once around it. A canopy, a sanctum, a place of awe. It was once housed in a small temple structure, and beside it stood the figure of Lakshmi, the consort of Narasimha, resting peacefully on his lap. But now only he remains, massive, silent, watching. The locals call it Ugra Narasimha, the fierce Narasimha. It's said that he was sculpted to show the moment when Narasimha tears through the demon king Hiranyakashipu, not out of rage, but to restore cosmic order. According to ancient mythology, the demon could not be killed by man or beast, inside or outside, during day or night, on earth or in the sky. So Vishnu took the form of Narasimha, neither man nor beast, and killed the demon at twilight, on a threshold, placing him on his lap. It isn't just religious symbolism. It feels like a puzzle carved into stone. The symmetry is slightly off, its details asymmetrical, almost intentionally so, as if the sculptor wanted to encode deeper meanings beyond what meets the eye. The eyes, especially, are hard to ignore. They don't simply look forward. They seem to look through you. They hold something ancient, something unspoken. For centuries, they've watched the sun rise and set over Hampi's granite landscape. They've weathered the fall of empires, the silence of abandonment, and the footsteps of travelers from distant lands. Many archaeologists have tried to determine whether the statue was part of a much larger ritual site. Some believe the entire area around it was once aligned with specific solar events. Others think it may have functioned as a protective deity for the surrounding region, a kind of spiritual guardian, but here's where it becomes more mysterious. The foundation beneath the statue is larger than necessary for a single figure. Excavations nearby revealed fragments of forgotten platforms, possible water channels, and foundation outlines that don't match the current visible structures. Some researchers believe Narasimha might have once stood at the center of a larger ceremonial platform, now lost or buried beneath layers of time and ruin. And there's more. Some satellite scans taken recently hint at strange alignments among temples, boulders, and shrines across Hampi's landscape, alignments that suggest a form of sacred geometry, as if the entire city had been designed to echo mythological patterns. Was the Narasimha statue placed with such precision for a reason? Did its eyes face a particular star, or its body align with solar rhythms? There are no definite answers, and that's exactly what draws people in. At night, under moonlight, the statue looks completely different. It no longer appears fierce, it appears eternal. The lion features soften in shadow, and you feel as though the figure is no longer roaring, but meditating, guarding not just the ruins, but the silence, the stillness of a past that refuses to fade. Visitors often describe the moment of standing before Narasimha as unsettling in a strangely beautiful way. You feel small but also safe, like the statue is more than a monument, more than art. It's a presence. The air around it is still. No wind seems to touch its stone frame. You can almost imagine the hum of ancient chants, the flicker of oil lamps, and the smell of incense that once hung in the air. And even though centuries have passed, the story it tells hasn't aged. It's a story of divine rage, of cosmic justice, of a world in balance and imbalance, of gods who walk among men, not to be worshipped blindly, but to restore the order that the world forgets. Hampi may be a ruined city, but the Narasimha statue remains unbroken in purpose. It is both past and present, myth and reality, a monument and a mystery. So the next time you see a photograph of it, or if you ever get the chance to stand before it in person, look closely. You may see more than a stone figure. You might see an echo, a guardian, a giant that never truly sleeps. Thank you so much for watching. See y'all in